Outer Banks Season 1 begins with showing the main actor, John B. Rutledge, and his 3 friends. These 4 beach boys often act up and are always chased by security. They lived in Outer Banks, the paradise on Earth. This island is divided into 2 areas. One is populated by the wealthy, while the southern is populated by workers and the poor, such as John B. and his friends, nicknamed Pogue. John's best friend, JJ, known as the son of a brave fisherman. He was super reckless, but he was good at surfing. Next, there was Kiara, who was actually the daughter of a rich restaurant entrepreneur, but she preferred to hang out with John. Last, there was Pope, and he was more intelligent than his friends, especially in maths. John himself lived alone after his father was declared missing at sea 9 months ago while searching for a shipwreck. He also didn't know his mother's whereabouts, as she had run away since John was 3 years old. John should have lived with his uncle, but his uncle's whereabouts was unknown. Even though his father had been declared died, John did not give up as long as he had not seen his father's body. That day, all the residents of the Outer Banks were shocked by the hurricane that hit this island, but John and Pope took reckless action and went surfing. That time, John also saw a ship swaying in the middle of the waves. The next morning, John saw that the tree in front of his house had fallen due to the storm. After the hurricane, fish were usually abundant, so John decided to invite his friends to go fishing. And here's where the story of these 4 best friends, the Pogues, began when John's ship hit a sunken ship. After diving, they estimated that the Grady White ship was worth $500,000. John found a motel key on the ship, but without them knowing, there was a body floating near the location. On the other side, a woman named Lana was looking for her husband Scooter. Lana asked her husband's boss, Ward Cameron, and his daughter Sarah. Sarah admitted that she last saw Scooter locking the cabin of her father's yacht. Meanwhile, John and his friends reported what they found to the beach police. But because their report was not responded to, John and his friends decided to check the motel according to the key they found. John and JJ went into the motel room, while Pope and Kiara were waiting on the boat. Suddenly, Kiara saw the police coming to the motel. With the code found on the table, John managed to open the safe. They were stunned after seeing that inside the safe, there was a lot of money and a gun. JJ immediately took the gun. Meanwhile, Kiara and Pope threw rocks at the window to tell their friends that the police were coming. When the 2 policemen came in, they didn't find anyone. It turned out that John and JJ were hiding outside the window. The policeman, Deputy Shoop, found a photo in the safe and he shared the money with his colleagues. John and JJ were almost caught after JJ dropped the gun. JJ not only took the gun, but he also stole a wad of money from the safe. Long story short, the police found the man's body, which turned out to be Scooter, Lana's husband. At the same time, John and his friends finally saw the man's body, who's known to be the owner of the sunken ship that they found. But they decided to keep it a secret. John didn't believe that Scooter was capable of buying a ship worth $500,000 because he ever saw Scooter begging. They suspected that Scooter was a drug dealer, and the ship must have contained the illegal goods. Instead of the stolen money becoming a disaster, they decided to buy beer and then share it with the other beach kids. That's when John saw Sarah, the daughter of a rich businessman, and it turned out that John worked on Sarah's father's boat. Sarah had a boyfriend named Topper, an arrogant man who looked down on the Pogues. Meanwhile, Deputy Shoop came to the museum and found out that the photo he found on the safe was a photo of a large ship called the Royal Merchant, which sank in a terrible hurricane in 1829. In fact, the ship was carrying British government gold worth $400 million. So does it mean that Scooter was hunting for treasure? On the other hand, a fight broke out between John and Topper because Topper didn't like John offering Sarah a drink. Because John almost drowned, JJ was forced to use his gun. The next morning, when he was waking up from sleep, John was surprised to see Sheriff Peterkin in his house. The sheriff came regarding the fight last night and the weapon used by John's friend. John said that he didn't know anything about the weapon, including the boat that sank near the swamp. Sheriff Peterkin threatened that if John lied, he would be handed over to social services or a juvenile prison. John and his friends were prohibited from approaching the swamp, but this actually made them even more curious about what was going on inside the ship. John decided to secretly borrow his boss's diving equipment, but Sarah suddenly appeared discussing the fight last night. John didn't want to respond because Sarah was in the group of rich kids who didn't like his kind. At the same time, the police and a team of volunteers started moving to look for the sunken ship. 2 suspicious men came pretending to want to help with the search. And when John and his friends arrived at the location of the sunken ship, Kira reminded John that he had a little oxygen tank left, and that meant John only had limited time. Suddenly, 2 policemen came near their boat, claiming they were fishing for catfish. John found a bag on the ship, but he couldn't pop upwards while the oxygen was running low. After the 2 policemen left, John rose to the surface, but suddenly, the 2 suspicious men chased them and even opened fire. They managed to escape after Kira threw a net. From the bag, they only found a compass, and John remembered very well that this compass belonged to his father. John believed that his father was alive, and this compass could be a clue to finding him. As he was returning the diving equipment, John saw Sarah sleeping on the yacht. John asked Sarah not to tell this to her father because he could be fired. Sarah promised not to tell this to her father, but Sarah's little sister, Wheezy, heard their conversation. That day, John and Jade came to Lana's house looking for clues regarding the compass. Suddenly, they heard a commotion in the house. Apparently, the 2 criminals were tearing apart Lana's house to look for the compass. After they left, Lana was surprised because John had the compass. Lana reminded John that there were dangerous people who wanted the compass. Meanwhile, Sarah had an older brother named Rafe, who was close to Topper. Here, Sarah was determined to get into the ship, making her fell. But it turned out it was a prank. Without Sarah's knowledge, Wheezy told Topper that Sarah teased John, even though John had stolen her father's diving equipment. While John and his friends came into John's father's private room to look for further clues. From the frame, John found the origin of the compass from 1880, which passed from one hand to another because the owner was always killed. And finally, the compass was held by John's father. When he opened it, John found a clue inside it, a red field writing, carved by John's father. Suddenly, the 2 thugs came to get the compass. Because JJ's gun was left on the terrace, they escaped through the window. In the room, these men found the blueprints for the Royal Merchant ship. John and his friends hid in the chicken coop, and they were almost caught. On the other hand, Sarah didn't like Topper's words, which said that pugs were trash. Topper then reminded Sarah's father that John liked to steal his things. Meanwhile, from Redfield writings found in the compass, John invited his friends to a lighthouse called Redfield. John was allowed to go up after saying that he wanted to know about the Royal Merchant. The officer who had been on guard for 30 years revealed the story of a sunken ship with gold worth $400 million in it. He believed that the ship sank in the far north due to a powerful hurricane, which was 16 kilometers in that direction at a depth of 300 km. It was exactly the same as John's father said. But when John showed the compass, suddenly a fight ensued. John and Kiara were taken to the police station due to the attack, but because they were still minors, the police did not detain them. The sheriff advised John to accept his father's death. Apart from that, she asked John to hand over the compass as evidence for the investigation. But John admitted that he did not have the compass. John was in trouble again after Sarah's father found out that he stole diving equipment, and he finally fired him. John accused Sarah of leaking their secret, even though Sarah had promised him. Suddenly, John was again chased by the 2 thugs. They almost took the compass if Sheriff Peterkin arrived late. Even so, John had no choice but to hand over the compass left by his father. John decided to let go of his father and forget about his ambitions, but he saw the name of his ancestor on the photo frame, which was almost burnt down. John then invited his 3 friends to continue the search because he was sure that his father wanted to tell him something. They headed to the grave of John's ancestor, Olivia Redfield. After pushing open the tomb, a poisonous snake appeared. Because the hole was too small, Kara decided to go inside. Here, she was stunned when she saw something. It turned out that Kara found a file left by John's father. They then ran away after seeing the thugs coming, but it turned out they were just gravediggers. Inside the envelope, there was a map and coordinates of the Royal Merchant ship that sank. Apart from that, there was a cassette player containing a voice message from John's father. While preparing the weapon, John's father admitted that he had found the location where the ship with treasure had sunk. John's father said if something happens to him, John must finish what he started to find the gold. He hoped that the 2 of them would meet again. John and his friends dreamed that if they find the treasure of $400 million, they will find a lot of what they want, especially to be a rich boy who will no longer be looked down on by the rich kids. While boarding on their boat, they met Topper and Sarah, who were using a luxury Malibu-type boat. Because the electricity on this island was out, John and his squad came to the hotel, which has a generator to go inside the computer room. They wanted to find out the location of the royal ship, armed with the coordinates they found. It was recorded that the depth of the ship reached 300 meters. JG had the idea to steal an underwater drone equipped with a camera in the confiscated goods warehouse where his father used to work. At the same time, Sarah saw Rafe being scolded by their father for wasting money, but incompetent to work. He was no better than the worker he fired, and Sarah just found out that her brother used the money from the generator to buy a motorbike. Rafe then went to a drug dealer because he was an addict and also a dealer of illegal goods. Meanwhile, to steal the drone, Kiara pretended to ask the security for help to change the tire. When the gate was opened, John and his two friends immediately came in. They got into trouble after they were attacked by the guard dog, so JJ distracted the dog. After he realized that he had been tricked, the security guard went back into the warehouse. Fortunately, John managed to get his drone first. JJ was caught by the security guard, pretended to cry and said that he was told by his father to take the lost carpet machine. In another place, a fisherman found a severed hand in his net. On the other hand, in the rich kids' party, Rafe sold drugs. Meanwhile, the poor kids asked for food at Kiara's father's restaurant. The sheriff got reports about the bodies of two men who were found by a fisherman. They were the two criminals who had been chasing John to get the compass. On the other hand, John and his three friends were testing an underwater drone. To go to the coordinates of the wreck of the Royal Merchant ship, they had to wait until the weather was stable. Sarah suddenly came to John's house to tell him that she wasn't the one who revealed their secret to her father. Meanwhile, JJ accompanied Pope, who was assigned by his father to deliver food to the customers. Coincidentally, at that location, Rafe and Topper were playing golf. JJ and Pope wanted revenge on Topper, so they beat the crap out of him. On the ship, JJ saw his friend's face hurt, so they planned revenge by sinking Topper's luxury ship. They both promised not to tell anyone, including Kara and John. The next day, these four kids started sailing to the coordinates of the sunken ship laden with treasure. After that, the underwater drone started to be launched. Pope focused on paying attention to the monitor screen, but suddenly, the weather was getting worse with the wind blowing very fast. They were stuck at a depth of 300 meters, but it turned out that there was no shipwreck at this location. Returning home, John was surprised by a social worker named Cheryl, who came to pick him up. John would be taken to a halfway house because he was still a minor. State regulations stated that John had to live with his parents or guardian. John could not escape. He then was taken by force. On the way, the photo of his father fell. He asked the officer to take the photo. John used this opportunity to run away. Accidentally, John hit a chain, then Sarah appeared to help him. John deliberately hid in the car. Meanwhile, Topper's boat was lifted, and he received complaints from his mother because of the costs involved to fix it. Topper's friend, Kels, felt sure that the perpetrator was Pope, after the two of them beat him. On the other hand, Sarah took John to her house to treat the wound on his stomach. John asked about the photo displayed in this room. Sarah said that he was Denmark Tanny, the founder of Tanny Hill. He was a slave who suddenly came to pay for all the land in this area with gold. Tanny was one of the crew members of the Royal Merchant ship, even though in the story, no one survived the shipwreck. When Sarah's father first moved here, he found Tanny's diary and various records which were eventually donated to the Chapel Hill National Library. It required special access to get in there, but Sarah didn't want to give it unless she came with John. Pope was surprised to see Topper and Rafe stalking him. Pope then met JJ, who was practicing shooting. JJ asked Pope to calm down because they had no evidence that Pope was the perpetrator that sank Topper's ship. Meanwhile, according to the report received by the sheriff, the two bodies were the men who chased John. On the other hand, Sarah and John secretly boarded the cargo ship to go to the city, while Rafe told Kiara to tell Pope that he already knew what he had done. JJ asked Pope to calm down because he had brought a weapon. JJ and Pope remained silent and didn't want to tell Kiara. On the ship, John told Sarah that his adventure was part of his determination to find his father. Here, the two of them started to like each other, but no one dared to reveal it. In another place, the forensic doctor said that the men died because they were hit by a fish spear, and afterwards the corpse was thrown into the sea to remove the trace. Arriving at the dock, John and Sarah ran away from the ship's crew. Because it was impossible to enter the National Library in tattered clothes, Sarah invited John to buy clothes first at a luxury boutique, and John was surprised by the price. Shortly, John dressed like a rich kid, while Sarah looked so beautiful in her dress. In another place, when watching the movie, Pope desperately needed to go to the toilet, but Topper and Rafe kept stalking him until finally a fist fight broke out between them. Kiara then came to help her two friends. Instead of using the gun, she decided to burn the screen. In the city before entering the library, Sarah wanted to know what John's goal was with all this. Sarah couldn't believe it when John said he was hunting for treasure in the form of gold worth $400 million on the Royal Merchant ship, which was stolen by Denmark Tanny. The two of them then reopened Denmark Tanny's history and diary. It was written that Denmark bought slaves to free them, but tragically he was hanged after being deemed to have committed rebellion. And this is the form of gold belonging to the British government, which was thought to be in the sunken ship. They also found the last correspondence. The letter was written on the exact day of his death, on May 3, 1844, for his son, Robert. On the one hand, the police visited Topper's house, showing camera footage of someone who had sunk Topper's ship. The police were sure that the perpetrator was Pope. Topper's mother couldn't accept this, so she demanded that the perpetrator be sent to juvenile prison. Shortly, John and Sarah felt that they had enough information, so they decided to return to the Outer Banks. They both thought that this short adventure was interesting. Meanwhile, the police came to arrest Pope, and suddenly JJ admitted he was the real perpetrator. He asked the police to release Pope. Because JJ's father was known as a recidivist, and Pope was forced to agree, JJ was finally taken to the police station. Right on the pier, before parting ways, John confessed his feelings to Sarah, telling her that he really liked her. And after that, they kissed. On the other hand, there was a mysterious person who kept John's father's compass and also the fish spear used to kill the two dead criminals. In the police station, the sheriff said that they could charge JJ with various cases of offenses, ranging from firearms to sinking ships. Then Franklin asked JJ about the two men in the photo. JJ recognized them as the perpetrators of breaking into John's house, and they were also the ones who were chasing him and his friends. In fact, the men had been killed. Now JJ was able to be free again for a while after his father came to provide bail. But they had to pay $3,000 for the cost of damage to the ship. This made JJ's father angry until he beat his son. JJ was fed up with his father pointing a gun. However, he decided to run away from home. Meanwhile, John came to school to ask his teacher for help in translating a letter left by Denmark Tanny. The letter was an outpouring of Denmark's heart to his son, Robert. However, at the end of the letter, it stated that the property and plantations were falling in market value. Importantly, Denmark requested to harvest wheat near the water on Plot 9. John felt strange because on the day he died, Denmark told his son to harvest the wheat. In fact, the picture of wheat is exactly the same as the logo of the gold treasure. So John felt happy to have found a very important clue about the location of the treasure. JJ suddenly intercepted him before John entered his house. It turned out that someone was stalking them. They then turned around to escape using a boat. This mysterious person got the compass from Sheriff Franklin. He said there were no more debts, because now it's even. Who is this man and what does he mean? It still has not yet been revealed. JJ expressed his anger, planning to run away because of the $30,000 guarantee he has to pay. He has experienced the same thing as his father, so John asked JJ to believe that they could find the treasure with the clues he has obtained. Meanwhile, Sarah couldn't refuse her father's invitation to the rich people's party, let alone having to meet Topper again. On the other hand, Pope's father forced Pope to help him as a chef at this event. Kiera was also forced by her mother to come along, because she felt that rich people were insensitive that the electricity sources were very limited, plus this island slowly sinking into the sea. Arriving at the party, Kiera preferred to chat with Pope rather than rich kids who brags about their parents' wealth. John assigned JJ to deliver a message to Sarah. After the message was delivered, JJ was chased by Raph and his gang. Sarah felt happy to be reunited with John. Plus, John admitted that he had found the treasure. But he needed the Tanny Hill blueprints belonging to Sarah's father. John hurriedly left after Topper called Sarah. Before JJ battered, the security immediately took him. That's when JJ, Kiera, and Pope chose to go on with their adventure, and did not care about parents who forbid them. Here, John revealed to his three friends that the gold was actually on this island. Some of it had been used by Denmark Tanny to buy this island and the slaves to be freed. But the black people were angry, then finished him off. But before that, Denmark hid his treasure in a location on this island, according to his last message. Kiera was shocked after finding out that John asked for Sarah's help to get the blueprint for this island. John said to his friends that he was only using Sarah to find the gold. Meanwhile, Sarah sneaked into her father's study room, admitted that she wanted to borrow a copy of the Tanny Hill map plantation land. Without mentioning the name, Sarah honestly admitted that this had something to do with a man she liked. It turned out that behind the Denmark painting, Ward hid a compass in his safe. So is Ward the mysterious man who collaborated with the sheriff? After drinking, Rafe allowed Topper to go into Sarah's room, even though it was Wheezy, Sarah's little sister, who was pretending to be sleeping in the room. From Wheezy, Topper knew where Sarah had gone. Meanwhile, when his friends were in the car, John went to meet Sarah, who was waiting on the treehouse, bringing a map of her land. They then were shocked by Topper's arrival, and Topper did not accept Sarah and John's relationship. Hearing Sarah's screams, John's friends immediately rushed to bring John to the hospital. Shortly, John received treatment at the hospital. Initially, John wanted to go back before social services caught him. Ward admitted that he had known everything from Sarah, that John had protected his daughter who was almost pushed by Topper. He also apologized for firing him, and to make amends for his mistake, Ward would become John's official guardian so that he would continue to live in his house without being afraid of social service officers. Of course, John accepted this offer with good enthusiasm, but we don't know if Ward's intentions are truly sincere. Ward invited John to live in his house. Of course, this made Sarah happy because she could be closer to John. When Ward asked John about the land plan, John admitted that he was only interested in history. Shortly, John showed the map to his friends. They focused on looking for the 9 plot in the northeast, which used to be a Tanny Hill plantation, but has now been sold. After tracing the map, they arrived at the house of a widow named Crane, who was said to have buried her husband's head inside the house. Meanwhile, the sheriff asked Lana regarding the burglary of her house and the GPS coordinates of her husband's ship when the hurricane occurred. He was going to a remote island 48 kilometers from the coast. However, Lana was reluctant to share the real facts with the sheriff. Meanwhile, Rafe was shocked when his friend Barry came to collect his drug money. Because Raph didn't have the money to pay, Barry tortured him. Raph's motorbike was confiscated and he was given 3 days to pay it off. Before these 4 kids entered the house, JJ told the story of the murder in this house that Crane committed against her husband. But that didn't stop John from looking for the gold. According to the instructions in Denmark's letter, they had to find water, even though it wasn't clear what the water was. They sneaked in under the house, but there was a fight between John and Kiara, because Kiara didn't like her best friend living with Sarah. That's when Pope found an old well right under their feet. This could be the water that Denmark meant in his will. On the other hand, Topper came back to see Sarah, hoping to get back together. However, because of that night's incident, Sarah was reluctant to forgive him. Topper dared to insult Sarah by calling her a whore, making Ward angry, then kicked Topper out of his house. To determine what Scooter was looking for on this island, Sheriff Peterkin and her men followed the island, while John invited Sarah to return to the old well to look for the gold. However, Kiara firmly refused because Sarah was a rich kid who wasn't suitable to join them, while JJ and Pope chose to be neutral. Kiara didn't like it even more when John said Sarah was his girlfriend. As a result, John had to find a way to reconcile them. Meanwhile, Rafe was forced to secretly steal a luxury watch belonging to his father, but he was caught. Shortly, the sheriff found glasses on this small island, which was similar to John B's father's glasses. The police were sure this had something to do with the death of Scooter and the 2 thugs. On the other hand, Ward decided to pay his son's debt to Barry. However, he threw the money on the ground, and this is the true nature of Ward, because Rafe had lied and stolen things. Ward didn't want him to stay at his house anymore. On the other hand, Pope took Kiara to his boat. There, JJ and John pretended to fix the boat. However, they deliberately let Kiara and Sarah be on the same boat to settle the dispute between them. Sarah tried to swim, but instead she was almost drawn. Actually, they have been best friends since elementary school. Sarah apologized, and Kiara also did so because at that time, she was the one who called the police. From then on, they made up again. In the morning, the boys came back to pick the girls up to continue their adventure to get the treasure. At night, they sneaked into Crane's house with a rope to go down the well. Sarah and Kiara were tasked with turning off the electricity in this house. Meanwhile, John, who went down into the well, was helped by JJ and Pope, who were holding the rope, but John almost fell. Because of their screams, Crane, the old widow, woke up from her sleep. When John arrived at the bottom of the well, he found nothing but the remains of a human skull. But suddenly, John found a hole, while Sarah and Kiara were chased by the owner of this house. In this hole, John finally found the gold, but the big problem was that the old woman fired a gun, so they hurriedly ran away from the house. Although they were almost in danger, John gave his friends the good news by showing them the gold he had found. But secretly, Ward heard Sarah and John's conversation about the finding of gold worth $400 million. They planned to take it immediately, but suddenly, tomorrow morning Ward wanted to invite John to go fishing. Wanted it or not, John said yes. Because the 3 gold bars that John found had wheat logos on them, they decided to melt them first. After that, they took the gold to the pawn shop to sell. After checking, this gold was really genuine and weighed 3 kilos. But it turned out that this pawn shop belonged to Barry. Even though it was worth $140,000, they agreed to sell it for $70,000. But JJ and his friends had to take the cash from the warehouse. Strangely, the address of the warehouse was in the forest. Suddenly, a police car forced John to stop the car. They immediately hid the gold. It turned out there was an armed robber, forcing them to lie down on the ground. When the thug was looking for the gold, John secretly got into the perpetrator's car. And he attacked the thug back, who turned out to be Barry. JJ, who was not satisfied, came to Barry's house to steal money as a form of revenge. Actually, his action was not approved by John and other friends because it could bring new problems for them. However, JJ remained stubborn and even decided to go alone. Barry, who didn't accept it, immediately went to see Rafe, full of anger. He said that Sarah and the Pogues had stolen $2,000 million of his money. If Sarah didn't return it, Raph would become his target again. On the one hand, Ward was told by his wife that the castle belonging to the old widow was going to be sold, but Ward didn't want to respond because he wanted to focus on finding the treasure. John and his friends were forced to postpone retrieving the gold from the well because John had to accompany Ward on a fishing trip. Meanwhile, JJ gave the stolen money to his father to pay the bail, but it turned out that his father was going to use it first for gambling. JJ, who didn't accept it, wanted to take the money back, so a fist fight broke out. JJ, who lost control, almost killed his father. Meanwhile, Rafe forced John to stop the car. A fight broke out between Rafe and Sarah, likewise John and Topper. In order to make his girlfriend happy, John took Sarah to an old church building with a beautiful view of the sunset. At night, Pope showed off the trolley he had made to transport the gold from the well. Suddenly, they were surprised by JJ's actions, who admitted that he had bought a tub along with all the accessories. All of this was a form of his annoyance with himself for his bad luck and regret for almost killing his father. Kara and Pope gave moral support to JJ as his true friends. Shortly that morning, John had prepared the boat to go fishing with Ward. They sailed in the middle of the sea looking for a potential spot. Ward deliberately gave John liquor, even though John was still underage. Because there were no fish, Ward asked John to tell him the truth. Ward admitted that he already knew that John had found the treasure, so Ward wanted to know whether it was in the sea or on land. Ward then offered to help transport the gold with a fair share. However, John pretended not to understand what he meant. John was surprised when Ward said he knew about Redfield, even though all this time he had never said anything about it to him. John remembered that he had given the compass to the sheriff. Here, Ward started to panic. There must be a connection with John's missing father. When John intended to report it to the sheriff, Ward's true character was revealed. John tried to ask for help, but Ward turned off his radio communication. Inside, John used a fish spear but again failed, until finally he lowered the jet ski to escape from there. Because the patrol ran out, John was forced to swim towards land until he arrived at Lana's house. The real facts were revealed here, when she told what she heard when her husband spoke to Ward. At that time, Big John, John's father, admitted to Ward that he had found the location of the treasure. Ward wanted a 50-50 share, but Big John, who felt he had spent 20 years searching for the gold, only wanted to give Ward a 20% share. Because of the quarrel, Ward accidentally pushed Big John until his head hit. But instead of asking for help, Ward actually drowned Big John's body. Ward covered up the incident, but the search for gold was still carried out after Ward stole a map of John's father's property. Because he had not yet found results, Ward sent Scooter to a small island when a hurricane hit this area. Scooter found Big John's body, including a compass near his hand, which means John's father had not died when Ward threw him into the sea. Right before he breathed his last breath, Big John carved Redfield's name on the compass. Meanwhile, at this time, Ward came to the police station and made a fake statement that John intended to kill him. Returning home, John ignored his friends. He focused on taking a gun to take revenge on Ward, who had killed his father. Arriving at Ward's house, John asked Sarah if she was the one who leaked the information about the gold to Ward. It turned out Ward was already prepared with his rifle. Sarah didn't believe John's words that her father had killed John's father. John failed to complete his revenge, so he returned home, but his friends weren't there. He then made a small boat with his father's photo as a form of goodbye. Ward made up a story to Sarah, blamed John for injuring and even intending to kill him, but Sarah didn't believe it and was in a difficult position. Suddenly, Ward remembered John's words to Sarah, who had found the gold which he believed was in Crane's house, which was about to be sold. It turned out that Kyra and her two friends were stalking Ward's house, making sure John didn't do anything reckless. There was an argument between them because Pope didn't want to interfere in John's business anymore, because in the morning, he had to go to an interview for his college scholarship. Finally, JJ broke them up and took Pope home. In the morning, John returned to Crane's house, and it turned out that this property had been bought by Ward. Entering the well, to his surprise, the gold had disappeared. On the other hand, Pope was accompanied by his father to take part in a scholarship interview. He heard that his father had gotten a job to clean the runway that would be used to land Ward's plane. Meanwhile, Rafe heard information from his younger sister that their father had invited Sarah to fly to the Bahamas. Rafe was quite surprised and disappointed because he should have been the one invited by Ward for business matters, because he was the first child. At that time, in his scholarship interview, Pope was asked about the proof of the gold after he admitted he had found it. He then realized something, so Pope decided to leave. Pope told John that he remembered his father's words that he would cut down trees to add a runway to Ward's heavily laden plane. That meant Ward intended to fly the gold they found for sale there. On the one hand, Lena also reported to the sheriff about how evil Ward was, who killed Big John. It turned out that Peterkin had also been tricked about the compass. Arriving at the runway, John saw Ward's men moving the gold into the plane. Because he saw that Sarah was being forced to go with her father, John did this reckless action. Ward was forced to stop his plane. Not long after, Sheriff Peterkin arrived and was going to arrest Ward for the murder of Big John. However, suddenly the sheriff got shot. Not knowing what was going on in his mind, Rafe recklessly shot Sheriff Peterkin. John realized that he could be the next victim, so he ran away from the runway on orders from Peterkin. Ward didn't want his son to be arrested, so he told Rafe to take his sister home. After that, he contacted the pilot to fly the plane. Sarah wanted to get out of the car, but Rafe didn't allow it until their cars almost collided. Meanwhile, Pope couldn't control his emotions because his future had been destroyed. He only calmed down after JJ gave him a piece of drugs. They were relieved because John was fine, and here, Ward made up a fake scenario again when the deputy came to save Sheriff Peterkin's life. Ward said the shooter was John, then they immediately rushed the sheriff to the hospital. But tragically, Peterkin could not survive. The police then started hunting for John, who was accused of killing the sheriff. Meanwhile, John was escorted by his friends to report the incident to the police station. But what John heard from the radio broadcast was that he was the suspect. As a result, John decided to run away. At home, Ward asked Rafe to cover up the incident because he had already made a report that John was the one who shot the sheriff. As a son, Rafe only wanted to be appreciated for what he did to save his father, even though it was a big mistake. Meanwhile, the new sheriff made a contest. Whoever managed to catch John would get a reward of $25,000. When the posters were displayed in every corner of the island, a man claimed to have seen the boy. Meanwhile, John and his friends were still hiding in the car, and at home, Sarah couldn't stop crying because of what her father and brother had done. She herself was even locked in her room. Because of the flyer, John was caught by the residents. John was asked to get out of the car so that his friends could distract the police. They made an appointment at the pier to plan John's escape from this island. Because the police were continuing to hunt him, John was forced to enter a house which turned out to be Kelsey's house, Rafe's friend. John was trapped in the laundry room. Meanwhile, because of the drugs, Pope rambled on, expressing his feelings to Kyra. But Kyra didn't want to respond, feeling that it wasn't the right time. Anyway, fellow porgs are prohibited from falling in love with each other. Meanwhile, Kels immediately woke Topper to keep an eye on John, while he was about to go report it to the police. At the same time, Pope distracted Ward by lighting a fire. Kyra took this opportunity to tell Sarah that John had been declared a fugitive. John, trapped in Kelsey's house, told Topper that he didn't kill the sheriff, but Rafe did. But of course Topper didn't believe it and thought John's talk was just a lie. Here, Topper found out that John really loves Sarah with all his heart. On the other hand, Sarah acted crying, so Wheezy went into her room. Even though Sarah wanted to go out to help John, the police team rushed to Kelsey's house after receiving a report. The new sheriff led the capture of John, who was locked in the laundry room. But when the door was opened, John managed to escape through a ventilation hole. The police, aided by the residents, spread out to hunt John down again, including the shameless Rafe. Apparently, John was heading towards the old church, followed by Sarah, who was sure that John would hide there. But it turned out that Topper was secretly following Sarah. Here, John and Sarah met again. Unexpectedly, Topper also went up and rang the bell to attract the attention of the police. That's when Sarah told Topper that Rafe was the one who actually killed the sheriff. Sarah said there was no way she would lie and sacrifice her own brother. But Rafe set the church on fire instead. After the fire got bigger, Topper came out, using John's sweater. It turned out he helped John and Sarah escape. Sarah then invited John to hide in the property being sold by her father. However, they saw Rafe and Celts who were hunting for John. Sarah and John planned to escape to Mexico the next day with the help of their friends. In the morning, the Pugs started sharing the job to help John. Pope went to get fuel for his ship. He looked annoyed to Kiara because his confession was not responded to. The situation became increasingly tense because the police asked for help from the SBI in this area to lead the hunt for John, who was accused of murdering Sheriff Peterkin. Agent Bratcher and the local police would draw up a plan to blockade this island and then search for the suspects systematically from one block to another. On the other hand, Ward was afraid that John and Sarah would reveal the true incident to the police, and that means Raph would be arrested. Rafe, who was desperate, went to look for drugs. Meanwhile, when John woke up, he found a message from Sarah, asking him to wait for her. It turned out that Sarah had come to the joint team headquarters who were making plans to find John. She wanted to report the true incident, but she was stopped by the officer. Agent Bratcher had approached her, but suddenly, Ward appeared to block her. That's when Sarah said that the real shooter was Raph. While Sarah was being escorted by the officer, Ward told the agent that his daughter had bipolar problems. Her brain had been washed by John, who he called a troubled boy who almost made him die. But whatever Ward said, Bratcher would still ask for a statement from Sarah. But the problem was that Sarah ran away again. In another place, Rafe came to Barry's house asking for drugs while telling him about his problem. They agreed to find John first because Barry was worried that John would reveal his illegal business to the police. While Sarah and John rushed out of this house after seeing the police coming. It turned out that the two of them were already on a surfboard. Meanwhile, when Pope was filling the fuel tank, he saw that the weather was getting worse. Pope was caught by his father, and he was forced to hit his father for stopping him from helping John. Kiara was also forced to go home by her mother, but she still went to help her friend. John told Sarah to go first to the pier, while he would go home first to get the 3 kilos of gold they needed for the escape expenses. And now JG had to take the key of the phantom ship from his father's hand. When JG was about to take the key around his father's neck, suddenly his father woke up to hug and apologize to him. JJ and Kara immediately left after getting the key. Meanwhile, the new sheriff, who did a search at John's house, found the 3 kilos of gold. Kiara and JJ unaware that they were being followed by Raph and Barry. Here, John saw his gold being put into the dashboard of the car. When the police returned to the house, John secretly got into the car to secure his gold, but he couldn't start the car because the remote key was too far away. The smart John was on purpose to lure the 2 policemen to come closer and pretend to surrender even though he stole the car. The sheriff was embarrassed because he was tricked by a boy. Now JJ and Kara would take the Phantom, the fastest ship that has ever sailed on this island, and it was faster than the police's ship. But suddenly, Barry and Rafe appeared to attack them. Here, Barry found out that Rafe had actually killed the sheriff. Luckily, Pope arrived on time, venting his anger. Arriving at the dock, John's friends didn't believe that John came in the sheriff's car. However, John didn't see Sarah here. So like it or not, he had to go alone to Mexico, leaving his 3 friends who were always there for him. Before leaving, Barry reminded Rafe that his life is in his hands because he knew the true facts. And finally here, Kira accepted Pope's love, and then the 3 of them were taken to the police station. As the storm began to worsen, John finally found Sarah. The 2 of them set sail, leaving the island behind. As the skies darkened, their ship had to pass a police patrol. Because there was no light, John took advantage of the waves to take their ship away from the pier. Agent Bratcher with his binoculars lurking in the ocean. But suddenly, the electricity went back, and their ship was in the spotlights. That's when John accelerated the ship's speed, and several police immediately chased them. John chose to direct his boat towards the point of the storm, and the police boat didn't dare to chase him anymore. Through a radio call, Ward persuaded John to turn back home for the safety of both of them, especially Sarah. Unexpectedly, John said that Ward had killed his father. It was clearly heard by the SBI special agent and the police team. Ward also had framed him for what he didn't do. John vowed that someday he would return to take what was rightfully his. Communications were cut off after the ship was hit by a storm. Kiara, Pope, and JG got bad news that John and Sarah most likely did not survive. The three of them cried hysterically. Long story short, John and Sarah managed to survive even though their ship had capsized. With the gold they managed to secure, they used the reflection of the light to ask for help from a passing fishing boat. Both of them survived, asking to be taken to the nearest port. It turned out they were being taken to Nassau in the Bahamas, where Ward dropped off the gold. It means that John's adventure was not over yet in order to get back the treasure. Outer Banks Season 2 begins with JJ, Kiara, and Pope were carving the name of their best friend, John B. Routledge, who was declared dead in a hurricane. Meanwhile, the residents of the Outer Banks Island attended the funeral of Sheriff Peterkin, who was killed by Rafe, but John B. was to blame. Because there was no evidence, the police could not arrest Rafe and also Ward, who was accused of murdering John's father. Meanwhile, John and his girlfriend, Sarah Cameron, boarded a ship to Nassau in the Bahamas. John B., who comes from a poor family, was struggling to prove that he can succeed in becoming a rich young man and is not a murderer as people accuse him of. Unexpectedly, Captain Terrence's crew showed a flyer with a $50,000 reward for anyone who could provide information on the whereabouts of John B., who was wanted for murdering a sheriff. But because this ship was carrying illegal goods, Terrence would hand over John after arriving at Nassau. Meanwhile, Kiara's anger towards Ward's family was applied in the form of vandalism. Kiara scribbled on the fence of the island's richest boss's house, calling them murderers. Meanwhile, JJ, who worked as a waiter in the restaurant for the rich, did not accept their accusations about John B. being the sheriff's murderer. On the other hand, Terrence deliberately locked Sarah and John when they arrived at the dock. Terrence would wait until the police arrived, and both of them didn't realize it. Sarah then showed her father's private villa on the other side, and John suspected it as the location where Ward was hiding the gold that was worth $400 million. When the coast police boarded the boat, John and Sarah immediately ran away. Sarah asked John to pretend to stay at this hotel so that the officers would allow them to enter. John then stole a cell phone belonging to a housekeeper, using it to send messages to his friends who were at school. John's friends were shocked after getting a message from an unknown number claiming to be John. They were sure this was really John because JJ once broke his surfboard. The three of them were so happy because it turned out that John and Sarah were still alive and were now hiding in Nassau. John asked his three friends for help to prove that he was innocent so he could return home to this island. When he was sleeping beside the swimming pool, John had a nightmare. When Sarah fell asleep, John decided to sneak into Ward's private villa. There John found the safe, and he thought that Sarah's father was storing the treasure there. Sarah woke up from her sleep, and she was disappointed because John was not beside her. A suspicious officer then called someone, and suddenly Sarah was kidnapped. In the morning, John was approached by Captain Terrence's crew member, Cleo, who said that Sarah was with them. At that time, John was taken to Terrence's house. They wanted to hand John over to the authorities to get a reward of $50,000. Having no other choice, Sarah was forced to hand over the 3 kilos of gold, which is worth almost $150,000, as long as they were freed. But the captain was not satisfied and would still hand over John to the police. Like it or not, John told him that there was other gold worth hundreds of millions of dollars in Sarah's family's private villa. Meanwhile, to help John, JJ, with his tough character, had an idea to force Rafe to confess his murder to the sheriff at gunpoint. However, Pope had a more brilliant idea by first spying on Ward's pilot, Gavin, who was flying the gold bars. Shortly, they arrived at the pilot's house, and Pope secretly put his cell phone in his car, which was deliberately connected to the AirPods. In the evening, Kiara called Gavin, saying that she knew that the sheriff's killer was Rafe. Kiara was threatening to report Gavin because he should have told the truth. Gavin, who was scared, immediately went to meet Ward. On the way, Pope heard when Gavin contacted Ward to ask for more money, so he could shut up again because he still had the gun that Rafe used to kill the sheriff. Ward was annoyed because Gavin asked for triple bribe money, including the plane. Because the car was too far away, Pope had difficulty hearing their conversation. Pope was forced to run to get closer to Gavin's car until he heard that Gavin and Ward were going to meet at a temporary construction site. On the other hand, Sarah invited Terrence into her father's villa on Paradise Island. Before Ward told Rose, his wife, that he would pay Gavin and secure his gun. And he would also secure the stolen gold treasure in Switzerland. Suddenly he saw a message to verify the security of his villa in Nassau. Realizing there was an intruder, Ward immediately contacted the security officer. Sarah managed to open the safe with her birth number, and there was the gold treasure that was supposed to belong to John. But now it was controlled by Ward. Because the police came, Terrence and his gang immediately left, while John and Sarah were deliberately locked there to be used as bait. John then distracted the police, while Sarah was going to wait for him on her father's private boat. However, Sarah was caught again by Terrence, who forced her to hand over the keys to the boat, and then Terrence with his crew ran away with the boat. John failed to escape after the police managed to catch him. One of the officers immediately contacted Ward, reporting that the intruder into his villa had been arrested. Because he wanted to know the face of the perpetrator, Ward asked for a video call. Sarah deliberately sprayed water in the park to damage the security guard's cell phone. As a result, Ward failed to see the perpetrator's face, and they tried to run away. They both managed to escape. Sarah expressed her disappointment to John, and from now on Sarah decided on their next plan. While Kyra, JJ, and Pope were monitoring and recording the meeting between Ward and Gavin. Even though Ward had given Gavin a bag full of money, Gavin refused to give Ward the gun on the grounds that the money wasn't enough. Pope recorded when the two of them were involved in a fist fight. Ward managed to seize the gun, and because he didn't accept that he and his son were called psychopath, Ward shot Gavin, so Gavin died while the gun fell into the hole. This murder was recorded by Pope, and Kara deliberately shouted at Ward so that he left the gun. But unfortunately, the camera was also damaged after they fell. Kiara immediately contacted the sheriff to come to the construction site. On the other hand, John and Sarah returned to meet Terrence to make an offer. Before the golds were moved by her father, Sarah invited them to steal it, in return $3 million for each person. However, they asked for a reward of $10 million per person. Without thinking twice, Sarah immediately agreed. At the crime scene, the sheriff did not find Gavin's body there. Because the camera was broken and there was no other evidence, the sheriff did not respond to Kara and friends' report, even though they had explained the incident clearly. It turned out that Ward had taken Gavin's body to his house. Raph was really shocked when he found out that his father had killed the pilot, because the pilot had blackmailed him with the gun that Rafe had used to kill Sheriff Peterkin, which should have been thrown into the sea. Gavin's body then was lifted onto the ship. After that, Raph was assigned to take the gun that had fallen into the sewer. Wheezy couldn't believe that her older sister, Sarah, contacted her because she thought that Sarah had died. Seeing Wheezy screaming with joy, her stepmother was eavesdropping behind the door. Sarah asked for Wheezy's help in getting information about their father's plans to meet with a banker, while Rafe paid Barry with a wad of money as long as he helped him to find the gun. On her father's laptop, Wheezy looked at the website of a bank in Switzerland which accepts high-security storage services. When Wheezy was about to send the transfer date to Sarah, suddenly she was surprised by Rose's arrival. Meanwhile, Sarah and Captain Terrence discussed plans to intercept the men who would move the golds from her villa to the air cargo company before being loaded onto the plane. Here, Cleo told a little story of her life as an orphan who ended up working as a cruise ship to survive. Cleo also said that Terrence was cunning, so they must watch out for him because he was always 2 steps ahead of them. In another place, Kara and her 2 friends looked for the gun at the end of the sewer. Because Pope and Jay didn't want to go in, finally Kira was the one who had the courage to go down to the hole. But because Kara was screaming in fear, Rafe and Barry heard her voice and then decided to drain the water, even though it was very dangerous and it could kill Kira. However, luckily, Kira managed to survive and managed to find the gun. Although Ward was disappointed because Rafe couldn't find the gun, they would argue that the gun was stolen by John B. from their house. In the end, JJ and Pope handed over the gun to Deputy Shoop as evidence that Rafe used it to kill Sheriff Peterkin. But again, their report wasn't responded well, even though it was clear that the gun was identified as Ward's. Long story short, Rafe and his father had arrived in the Bahamas. Rafe was shocked after seeing the gold in the safe. Ward admitted that he had found this treasure from the Royal Merchant ship. But that's nonsense because in the first season, it was clearly told about the struggle of John's father, and followed by John himself, who managed to find the location of the gold. Ward was just a thief who took the rights of others. The gold was loaded into a box and then transported to a pickup truck. At the same time, Sarah and John, assisted by Captain Terrence and his crew, began to devise a plan to stop the truck which carried the golds. Ward hired a private security team to escort the gold to the aircraft. Terrence's subordinate, Steve, reported to his team that the truck was being escorted by armed security. Interestingly, hundreds of children and youths on the island were deliberately engaged to intercept their cars. The children even laid nails to deflate the tires of the bodyguards' cars. Therefore, Ward was forced to continue traveling without an escort. Arriving at a sugarcane field, Terrence and Cleo intercepted them. After Ward and Rafe were forced to the ground, that's when John and Sarah showed up to snatch the gold. But suddenly, Ward saw Sarah, and the situation got out of control. Ward's bodyguards came back to chase them. Sarah and John were hiding in the sugarcane field, but unexpectedly, Sarah was shot by a bullet fired by Raph. John immediately contacted Captain Terrence to ask for help. Not long after, Terrence came and gave the doctor's address to save Sarah. Cleo then gave the gold back to John, and John immediately left after they exchanged cars. Meanwhile, Pope was visited by someone from a foundation to send a letter from a scholarship benefactor after hearing the story of the Royal Merchant ship. Pope was shocked because the letter had the wheat logo stamp, which was exactly the same as the gold logo. Meanwhile, arriving at the doctor's house, Sarah immediately got treatment. Meanwhile, Terrence and his crew moved the gold onto the ship, covering it from the Marine Police. Because Sarah lost a lot of blood, the doctor couldn't guarantee her safety. John was forced to give his gold to pay the doctor. In another place, when Pope read the letter, it was written that the sender had evidence that could free John. Therefore, Pope had to come personally to meet the sender directly at the office in Charleston at 8 o'clock this evening. The sender of the letter was Carla Limbre. Because the city was 8 hours away from here, they have to leave now. Interestingly, Limbre was related to the captain of the Royal Merchant. On the other hand, the doctor has managed to remove the bullet from Sarah's body, and now they can only wait, hoping that Sarah will wake up again. Captain Terrence and Cleo decided to wait for John and Sarah to arrive for the next 8 hours. Long story short, Sarah's condition got worse, even though she was using a ventilator. The doctor then declared Sarah was dead. But when John had given up, a miracle suddenly came. Sarah's pulse returned. Meanwhile, Ward and Rafe came to the Bahamian police station. Here, Rafe realized he had shot Sarah, even though he was aiming at John. After showing John and Sarah's photo, Ward asked for help from the police to find them. On the other hand, Kiara argued with her parents when she said that she would go to Charleston. At the same time, Terrence and his crew panicked to find out that the police were coming. After Sarah woke up from her faint, John asked her to leave because the police started looking for them. Using the doctor's car, both of them went to the pier. Kiara and her friends would soon be traveling to Charleston. But the problem was that they had difficulty communicating with John. Arriving at the pier, John saw that the police had secured the gold. They then ran away after one of the police recognized their faces. But suddenly, John hit someone who turned out to be Cleo. She said that she would jump into the sea after the police surrounded Terrence's ship. Pope also got into trouble because his father's car broke down. Meanwhile, Ward laughed happily because his gold was safe again, unlike Raph, who looked gloomy, either because he regretted shooting his own sister or regretted that he failed to kill her. Before continuing their journey, Pope and his friends were forced to repair their car first at the repair shop. At the dock, Cleo handed back Sarah's father's boat, which had been stolen by her boss. But suddenly, someone tried to stop them, but luckily they managed to escape. On the ship, John and Sarah discussed, then decided to return home to the Outer Banks. Long story short, John and Sarah had arrived at a pier in Charleston to buy petrol, as well as 3 of their friends who had also arrived in Charleston. They didn't know that John and Sarah were on this island. Kiara, JJ, and Pope arrived at the residence of Limbre, the rich person who owns half of this island. Because they needed money, John and Sarah worked together to steal money from a man who was sitting in the restaurant. At Limbre's house, the bodyguard named Ryan only allowed Pope to enter the house, while Kiara and JG should wait outside. Apparently, the heir of the captain of the Royal Merchant was a woman named Carla Limbre. This woman admitted that she had known that Pope and his friends had found treasure left by her ancestors, and then had it confiscated by Ward. In fact, Limbre had long been funding the search for the gold with Ward, who was then still her partner. Like Big John, Limbre also has been betrayed by Ward. Interestingly, Limbre had proof that Rafe actually killed Sheriff Peterkin. That means that John's name can easily be cleared again. She showed the recorded evidence, but she didn't want to give this evidence for free to Pope unless he did something for her. Limbre wanted a key left by Denmark Tanny, which Pope didn't understand. Pope then was invited to the backyard, while Kiara and JJ followed them. Limbre claimed to live in a house built 280 years ago. then said that there was a special room for slaves in this house. Meanwhile, Sarah, who was filling up the petrol, was shocked by the man whose money they stole. And in Limbre house, it turned out that there was Denmark Tanny's grave. At that time, Denmark, who succeeded in freeing the slaves, failed to free his wife and child because of the refusal of Limbre's father's ancestors. Denmark's wife drowned while trying to escape, while their child was safe. On the one hand, Denmark was hanged on charges of rebellion, even though he was looking for his wife's body. Limbre said that the key led to the Santo Domingo cross, the real treasure that was at the feet of the angel. Pope increasingly didn't understand what Limbre meant. She was sure that Pope's father knew about the key, and Pope was trying to escape. The three of them ran away from Rien, and at the same time, John and Sarah were passing there, but the three of them didn't see it. However, Sarah saw them. When John was cycling an electric bike, they finally met again. They were feeling happy and emotional because finally, the five friends gathered again in a location they didn't expect before. Sarah said to Kira that John had proposed to her on the boat. Meanwhile, John wouldn't run away again because he was determined to fight Ward to prove his innocence. Ward himself had returned home to tell Rose that Sarah was still alive, but Rafe accidentally shot her. Because Sarah could give testimony that can put Raph in prison, Ward has to decide which of his two children he chooses, Sarah or Raph. But if Ward can't do it, then Rose will decide. When JJ bought beer, Kels accidentally saw John and Sarah on the boat. He then told what he saw to Rafe, and coincidentally, Topper was also there. After that, Rafe told Barry to work together to hunt John back down. In the evening, John and his friends held a party, while Pope and Kiara chose to have their own intimacy on the boat. Meanwhile, John thought he heard someone coming. While Barry and Rafe came looking for John, they then hid in a tree. Raph was so angry until he fired a shot in any direction, which almost hitting them. In another place, Limbre was so sure that Pope had the key she wanted, and because of that, she would do anything, even if it had to be done with violence. In the morning, Sarah intended to meet her father because she didn't want her best friends to be involved. Sarah would urge her father to make a choice between herself and Raph. That time, Ward was surprised when he saw his daughter come to see him. However, Sarah didn't want to be touched at all. Sarah then asked Ward to admit all his crime actions to the police, including handing over Rafe. But her father stubbornly didn't want to do that, even though he had promised to do anything as long as Sarah returned home. Disappointed with her father, Sarah chose to leave again. But Ward immediately contacted the sheriff. Sarah returned to meet John and her friends, but suddenly the police came to chase them. Cornered JJ intended to use his gun against the police, but John forbade him. Finally, John was arrested. After being thrown into a cell, John underwent his first trial. He was being charged with first-degree murder with the death penalty if John was found guilty. Kiara, who could not accept it, then cursed Ward after the trial was over because he should have been the one tried as the murderer. Languishing in prison, John wrote the whole story of his life, starting when he and his friends found a sunken boat belonging to Scooter. Again, JJ had a crazy idea to get John out of the prison, like kidnap the sheriff and storm the prison. He would do it all to free his best friend. However, none of his friends agreed with his crazy ideas. Kiara would try to ask her parents for help in hiring a lawyer, while Pope would ask about the key that Limbre wanted from his father. Meanwhile, Rose urged her husband to find a way to silence John before Deputy Shoup believed in his story. Turns out, Ward had bribed Deputy Terry with a bag of money to John was seen committing suicide in his cell. Convincingly, Ward said that he saw clearly when John shot Peterkin. When Pope showed a picture of the key to his father, it turned out that he had seen Pope's great-grandmother hanging the key around her neck, while Kara was scolded by her mother because she was considered more defensive of her friend rather than her own parents. Because of an argument between Kiara and her mother, Kiara was kicked out of her parents' house so that she could truly live as a Pogs. On the other hand, JJ really did the reckless action for the sake of his best friend. He came to the police station to meet John. These two boys could still laugh even though JJ knew John was suffering. John couldn't believe it when his friend said that he was planning an escape for him. At 11 o'clock tonight, JJ told John to pretend he was having an appendicitis attack, so he should smear his face with soap to make it look pale and then put his hands in cold water. That way, the police would take John to the hospital because he was pretending to be in pain. That's when JJ would pick him up to escape. Before going home, JJ saw his father also languishing in a detention cell for reasons that have not been revealed. Sarah sent a message to her sister, asking for help, but there was no answer at all. On the other hand, Rafe wanted a firm answer from his father about who he chooses, whether himself or Sarah. But Ward answered that he didn't choose anyone because he loved them both, and it made Rafe dissatisfied because he was the one who saved his father. That's when Rafe accidentally read the message from Sarah on her sister's cell phone. Sarah was tricked into coming to the Deech Point at 10 at night. JJ's next plan was to ask for help from Ricky, who served as an ambulance driver for standby tonight. Because Ricky refused to get involved with JJ's plan, JJ was forced to steal the ambulance, while Pope entered the apartment left by his great-grandfather. Armed with a picture, he saw the ceiling in this apartment, which was exactly like the picture. When Pope wanted to open it, he fell and saw a hole. Turns out Pope found something above there. Apparently, this is the key that Carla Limbree wanted. Pope immediately went cycling to show the key he found to Kiara. When the key was illuminated, a light in the darkness appeared an inscription that said, "Way to the tomb begins in the island." Even though they didn't understand what it meant, Pope was sure this has something to do with Denmark Tanny, and they had to search for it. A policeman approached JJ, who claimed to be replacing Ricky's job. Suddenly, JJ got a radio call to bring a patient from the police station. Sarah was shocked because she thought it was Wheezy who had come. However, it turned out to be Rafe who came. Rafe didn't accept being accused of being a murderer, so he went even crazier and attacked Sarah even though she was his younger sister. While secretly, Terry gave John's cell's key to another prisoner who was assigned to kill John. While John was preparing to carry out his plan with JJ, arriving at the police station, JJ was shocked because the sick prisoner he had to pick up was not John. The suspicious officer asked where he was from, and JJ just answered it carelessly. Because there was no nurse, JJ was forced to sit in the back with the patient, while the driver was replaced by the police. The officer only realized after being told that JJ was not the ambulance driver who had replaced Ricky. And suddenly, this is what happened to John. JJ also got into trouble because the police already knew he was the fake ambulance driver. At the same time, Sarah and John were attacked. Both of them almost died. Sarah managed to survive after Topper hit Rafe, while John also shouted for help. He told the sheriff that someone wanted to kill him. JJ could escape from being chased by the police after Kiara and Pope came to help him. Sarah was taken to a safe place by her ex-boyfriend. Meanwhile, Deputy Shoup met with Agent Bratcher, who had carried out a ballistics test on the gun the children had given him. And it turned out that the bullets matched. Plus, Rafe's fingerprints were found on the bullets. Because the children were right, the police team and SBI agents were sent to Ward's house. John didn't expect the charges against him to be dropped, and that meant he could be free again. He then went home using Twinkie, his lovely car. 3 of his friends were happy to welcome John home, but something was missing because he didn't see Sarah. Sarah herself lived in Topper's house, who had saved her from Rafe's attack. Ward could no longer escape because the police have evidence to arrest Rafe as the perpetrator of the murder of Sheriff Peterkin, with the fingerprints on the bullet casing. But it doesn't stop there. The police and SBI agents would look for other evidence to prove that Ward killed Gavin, the pilot. Sarah looked so happy when she saw John was free again, but John was disappointed because Sarah didn't want to admit their unofficial engagement to Topper. Rafe, who was with Barry, got a message from his father to hide there because the police were hunting him. Pope's father was suddenly visited by Ryan Renfield. On the other hand, John started to feel annoyed with Sarah because she didn't want to tell Topper the truth about their relationship. As a result, their relationship started to get bad. After getting information that his father was injured, Pope immediately went home to see how he was doing. Pope's father admitted that he was attacked by a man who asked for the key as Pope showed. Finally, Pope showed the key he found to his father. Pope's father supported his son to continue his adventure in looking for the answer behind this key. Because of this wound, Pope couldn't give up on their threats. It turns out that Ryan was Limbree's stepbrother who wanted the inheritance if Limbree died, because she was ill. However, Limbree didn't want to hand it over before she got the key. That day, the police team followed Rose, who came out of her house and went into the car wash. It turned out that Ward was hiding in the trunk of the car. According to the article that Kyra read, the key was related to the Cross of Santo Domingo, which was a very valuable gift for the new king of Spain from the former king. The size was really big, as tall as a human being. The cross was declared lost off the Bermuda coast in 1829, so they would explore more to find out its correlation with Pope. The first thing Pope did was meet his great-grandmother who lived in a nursing home. Pope asked about the key that his grandma had been keeping. Apparently, Pope is a descendant of Denmark Tanny, and he inherited the key from generation to generation. But the lineage of the important figure who freed the slaves was kept secret by his great-grandmother in order to protect her children and grandchildren. On the other hand, Ward came to his son's hiding place and gave him a wad of money to get Rafe off the island and head to Wilmington. Rafe apologized to his father for being a drug addict and ruining everything. After his father left, Rafe gave Barry some money and then asked him to leave. After finding out that Pope was a descendant of the king's family, his friends were happy. But suddenly, Limbre and Ryan appeared, provoking Pope because Ryan had beaten his father. John then threatened to throw away the key if they dared to mess. Finally, the key was exchanged for a recording of Gavin's confession. But it turned out that the key John had given to Ryan was fake, because the original one was still in Pope's hand. At the same time, Barry took Rafe to escape by boat through the swamp. But without Rafe realizing, the police had surrounded him. Rafe, the fugitive, was caught by the police because of information from Barry. Ward couldn't believe that his son had been caught by the police. Meanwhile, John handed over a recording of Gavin's confession, who admitted that he was told to throw away the gun that Rafe used to kill Peterkin. And if something happened to him, it must have been Ward's doing, which was also stated firmly by Gavin. As John said previously, Ward had killed his father and Gavin. The police then asked the judge for approval to release Ward's arrest warrant, but because the judge was Topper's grandfather, he immediately told Sarah that her father would be arrested. The police team immediately surrounded Ward's house. However, Ward was already on his yacht to escape. Sarah was accompanied by her friends to go home to see her father's arrest. On the luxury yacht that had been his title as the richest man on this island, Ward admitted all his evil deeds. Sarah had persuaded Ward to surrender himself, but unexpectedly, the yacht exploded. In a recording addressed to his family, Ward confessed that he had killed Big John, Sheriff Peterkin, and Gavin. Because of that, Rafe was freed. In his will, Ward ordered his wife and children to divide all his wealth equally. As the child who was saddest over her father's death, Sarah took out her disappointment on Rafe. As the older brother who was supposed to protect their family, Rafe instead wanted to kill Sarah. On the other hand, Sarah's disappointment affected John, because John's expression looked happy when he saw Ward dead, even though John reasoned that Ward had killed his father. That's when Sarah decided to end their relationship. Instead of going home, Sarah chose to stay at Topper's house. Of course, Topper took advantage of this opportunity because he had high hopes that Sarah would accept his love again. John's friends also gave him encouragement because they were sure Sarah would return to John, because she was already part of the Pogues. On the one hand, Limbre just realized the key she got from the boys was fake. Because of that, Ryan was assigned with recruiting his friend in the military to get the key she wanted. Realizing she was dying, no matter how much money and resources it takes, Limbre didn't mind it. That day, John and his friends were going back to school. One of the students who was interested in John asked to meet at the bonfire festival. Sarah was also invited by Topper to come later that night at the same party. Their history teacher showed them Denmark Tanny's diary book. Pope's ancestor wrote the story of his life, including a large cross that was carried on the royal merchant ship. Ryan then met his old friend in the military who was skilled at archery. Rose and Rafe get into a dispute because they didn't know where the gold was kept. Apart from that, the company owned by Ward, which was passed down to them, was in bankruptcy with a lot of debts. Rafe, who was so emotional, hit the walls of his house, but it looked like they found a new secret hidden in those walls. In the diary of Denmark Tanny, it was stated that the royal merchant ship encountered the Spanish ship, San Jose, which burnt. But the Spanish captain only cared about one thing, namely the cross of Santo Domingo and gold bars, which were very valuable. Before it sank, Captain Limbre, the captain of the royal merchant, gave the order to cut the anchor. The valuables were secured, but the entire crew of the Spanish ship was left to drown along with their ship. Because the cross was too heavy, it wasn't hidden in the well like the gold bars. This is the puzzle they have to solve based on the clues in the key. The path to the tomb starts in the island room. These kids were still confused about what the island room meant, because they were having trouble figuring it out. Shortly, at the bonfire party, John's classmate, who had a crush on John, seduced him. Sarah, who happened to be there, felt jealous when she saw John with another woman. John was also jealous when he saw Sarah dancing happily with Topper. There was a commotion between them, which ended in a fight. The Pogs kids then decided to leave the party. Suddenly, John felt that someone was stalking them, and it turned out to be Ryan, who threatened to shoot an arrow at them if he didn't get the original key. Pope had no other choice but to give the key from his ancestors. Rafe accused his stepmother of lying about the gold bars. He then threatened her with a knife. Suddenly, Limbre and Ryan came to Ward's house to see the island room. In the morning, Topper took Sarah back to her house. However, Sarah didn't find anyone at home. Sarah then looked at the painting of an island hidden behind the walls of her house. Sarah then returned to the base of Pogs to tell them that she had found the island room in her house. This painting depicts all the locations on this island which were painted by Denmark Tanny. Here, they knew from Wheezy that Carl Limbre came to the house to see the island room, discussing Flamingo Beach and the treasure buried at the Angel Feet. Their attention was drawn to the giant tree which had holes like eyes. Passing through the jungle affected by tidal water, they had no choice but to continue the journey. Long story short, these treasure hunters saw Carl Limbre and her team, including Rafe, digging something right under a giant tree. In a coffin, they found no crosses or valuables, only a skeleton. Limbre, who was disappointed, took her team back to the island room. That's when Pope saw the skeleton of Cecilia, the wife of Denmark Tanny, his ancestor. As a form of respect, they reburied the coffin. Meanwhile, Rose received a letter from someone which surprised her. After reburying the coffin, JJ saw a hole in the tree like in a painting. When he put his hand in, JJ made a prank, but it turned out that in the hole, they found a telescope with the words, HMS Royal Merchant. Inside, it was found a writing again saying that you've come this far, so don't be shaken. The cross is on the Friedman altar, to be precise, in the church. Exiting this forest, they had to face a muddy road flooded by higher tides. Because there was no choice, John kept going with his lovely car. Unfortunately, their car got stuck in a puddle of water and had to be towed. Like it or not, Kira had to take her parents' car and JJ would take the crane machine from his house. Arriving at her house, Kira secretly took her parents' car and after that, they stopped at JG's house. It turns out that JG's father has left the prison, but he caused problems again by stealing medicine in the pharmacy. He didn't want to go back in the cell. JJ's father wanted to escape from this island by boat. Like it or not, JJ would take his father first, even though his friends in the forest were already waiting for him. However, John and Pope couldn't wait any longer, so they planned to use a wooden block to lift the Twinkie to float on the water. JJ stopped at a food stall, buy some supplies for his father, and here Kira's emotions were provoked because JJ's father insulted her mother. When John was looking for wood, suddenly a crocodile attacked him. Sarah didn't stay silent, she took a knife to attack the crocodile. And here JJ had to be separated from his father. He also took the medicine that he stole. Meanwhile, Topper came to Sarah's house, but Rafe said Sarah was going with John, because Rafe could track her using the cell phone he gave Sarah. And finally, Rafe found out that Sarah was on Goat Island. At that time, he invited Ryan and Carl Limbre to chase them. Because of Sarah's heroic actions, John saved from being attacked by a crocodile. Not long after, JJ and Kiara arrived, and they were scolded by their friends for coming too late. Because they were so noisy, JJ finally revealed the reason why he was late. It was because he had to accompany his father for the last time. They finally understood JJ's reason. The Pogs kids came together again to pull Twinkie out of the water. Shortly, this treasure hunting squad arrived at the old church, and there was nothing there until Pope saw a wooden beam up there in the shape of a cross. Pope was determined to climb up there, not caring about the wasp nest. When Sarah took a handspike in the car, she felt someone was stalking her. Turns out, inside this block, there was a large cross made of gold and diamonds. But suddenly, Pope fell down. This was the real treasure from Pope's ancestors, which is estimated to be worth billions of dollars. They had to secure this valuable item before it was confiscated by Carla Limbre and her minions. Suddenly, something happened to Pope due to a bee sting. So they were forced to leave the cross to focus on saving Pope. That's when Rafe and Ryan entered the church. John and friends took Pope to Ricky's house, the ambulance officer, to get help. After being injected, Pope got up again, as if he had a magic serum. Even though his eyes were still red, he insisted on driving Kira's car, but they actually had an accident. That's when they saw Ryan and Rafe passing by from the church with a truck. When they arrived at the church, the cross made of gold had disappeared. Remembering Denmark Tanny struggled to free the slaves, Pope vowed that he would not give up on getting the cross back. Meanwhile, Rose paid the ship rental to a captain, but he had to hide the identities of the passengers. Arriving at the aircraft hangar, Ryan showed the golden cross to Limbre. The treasure that she had been looking for was actually found by the suburban kids. By using the key, Limbre was hoping to find something in there, but in reality, there was nothing that could bring a miracle to cure her illness. Ryan laughed at Limbri and then invited Rafe to master the Golden Cross, but Limbri used her gun. Raph didn't care about this paralyzed woman, so he took the gun and ran away with the treasure. On the other hand, John and his friends were intercepted by the sheriff after he received a report that Kara's parents' car had been stolen, so Kara had to go with them to be taken home. Rafe then contacted Rose, saying that he had got the cross, but Rose asked Raph to go home first because there were other big things that he needed to know. At home, Kara got a strong reprimand from her parents. Because she caused many problems, Kara would be sent to a special school for problematic children, except she would no longer have contact with the Pogues. In the meantime, John and his friends saw Rafe take his truck to Sarah's house. Before Sarah went into her house to find out more information, John apologized to her, hoping that Sarah would accept him again. Luckily, Sarah wanted to get back together with John. Sarah asked her sister for help to divert Rafe's attention, and she used this opportunity to take the car key. Curious about what was inside of the truck, Sarah was shocked when she saw that there was a dead man in it, but Rafe appeared and took her into the house, locking her up. Meanwhile, JJ and his friends were caught by local residents who were suspicious because they were carrying guns, accusing them of being thieves. Because Sarah kept on raging, Rose brought her a drink, but it turned out that it had been mixed with sleeping pills. After Rafe told Rose what happened, Rose told him to take care of the body and then take the cross to the pier. Seeing Rafe leaving, Pope decided to hang on top of the truck. Meanwhile, John and Jade tried to stop Rose from taking Sarah. Because it didn't work, they immediately chased her. Arriving at the forest, Pope saw Rafe throw up Ryan's body to be eaten by a crocodile, and after that, Pope confronted Rafe. However, Pope failed to defeat Rafe, so there was no choice. Pope then asked for Kara's help to pick him up. Before Kara came, Pope took JJ's gun, which was hidden in this location. Meanwhile, John and Jade followed Rose to the dock, and there they saw the coastal venture which had been managed by John's father last year. Not long after, Kara and Pope came to help them free Sarah and reclaim the cross which had been put in the ship. Pope had to do this so that he could get into the ship. Because the workers were leaving, they used this opportunity to infiltrate the container. Then this container was lifted by the workers to be placed on the coastal venture. Luckily, the crew did not know their whereabouts. Sarah was locked in one of the rooms inside this ship. And surprisingly, it turns out that Ward is still alive. Sarah didn't believe that her father faked his death. Because of Rafe's request, the captain assigned his crew to make sure there were no stowaways on board this ship. One of the crew members saw Rav showing the cross to his younger sister. Ward then confessed that he had planned everything so that everyone thought he was dead. Even before the explosion occurred, Ward first escaped using diving equipment, and this ship would take their family to live a new life on a private island located near Guadeloupe. Sarah didn't care about the plans, but she just wanted to tell John and his friends that she was fine. To get out of this container, Kiara found a ventilation hole. Sarah said that she is seasick, so she secretly got out of the room without Rose knowing. She would steal the captain's satellite phone in the cockpit. But Sarah's plan failed because the captain caught her. John and Pope came out of the container to look for Sarah and find the cross, while JJ and Kiara stood by and there waiting for news from them. Getting a report from the captain, Ward returned to lock up Sarah. In the engine room, it turned out that the ship's technician was Cleo, but Pope didn't know her. Realizing that Pope was a stowaway, they were involved in a fight. Meanwhile, John triggered the fire alarm to divert the crew's attention. When they found the gun cabinet, chaos happened. Cleo finally let go of Pope after he claimed to be John and Sarah's friend. And here, John found out that Ward was still alive. At the same time, John met Cleo, who happened to work on this ship. Because the crew was hunting them, John and his friends went back into the container. Because they still couldn't find the stowaway, the captain assigned his men to search the container. John's friends were shocked after John said that Ward was still alive. He was sure Ward deliberately faked his death to save Rafe. Here, JJ made a quite clever plan by first controlling the captain on the bridge and then forcing his crew to gather on the front side. Once they were gathered, that's when JJ and his friends would lock up the crew members. Suddenly, 2 crew members wanted to open the container, but luckily they were stopped by Cleo, who said she had checked that there were no stowaways in there. After that, Cleo pretended to have caught Pope, taking him to the cockpit, but actually they attacked the captain, while Ward dragged Sarah, making her fed up with all his lies and criminal acts. Ward admitted that he was doing all this for his children, but Sarah actually thought that Ward was doing it solely for his own benefit and his greed. Finally, Sarah managed to escape and lock up her father. After succeeding in holding the captain captive, the captain was forced to order his crew members to gather in the front hull room. That's when JJ, John, and Kara came out of the container. They counted the crew members who had entered the front hull except for Rafe, who refused to go in. The captain was tied up again after he tried to put up a fight. After they all entered the room, JJ and Kiara immediately locked the door. Meanwhile, John was still trying to find Sarah. Pope, JJ, and Kiara worked together to raise the cross with a crane to put it in the diving boat. But Rafe suddenly appeared to attack John. It turned out that Sarah was lowering the rescue boat. After the captain managed to untie him, he immediately let Ward out, who was locked up in the engine room. The cross began to be lifted using the crane. When Sarah managed to lower the lifeboat, she still didn't know that John and his friends were on this ship. A big problem haunted these kids because the captain managed to get his crew free. Meanwhile, Ward actually planned to kill his own daughter. Fortunately, John arrived on time, while Kara and JJ had to face the captain. Pope was forced down by the crew. Unfortunately, JJ was hit with a machete and was thrown under the sea, and Kara immediately jumped to save him. Ward was battered, hit by John until his head bled, hit by the iron floor. John could have drowned him, just like what happened to his father, but he didn't do this cruel act because John saw Sarah. They both immediately jumped to get on the lifeboat. Pope's attempt to get the cross gold failed. He decided to sink the treasure under the sea, but Rafe and the crew first grabbed the rope. That's when Pope and Cleo jumped into the sea to get to the lifeboat. They turned around to find JJ and Kiara. After that, they immediately ran away. Rafe intended to open fire at them, but he couldn't do it. Finally, JJ regained his consciousness. That gold cross was again controlled by Raph, while Ward was getting better after receiving treatment from the doctor. Rafe felt he had succeeded because he had regained control of the golden cross, but for his father, Sarah was still important, and because of that, Rafe had to take her back. John and his squad were forced to anchor on the empty island because the lifeboat ran out of petrol. Even though they failed to get the gold and the cross, John thought that there were many other positive things that they should be grateful for, especially their togetherness as the Pogs, which money cannot buy. Meanwhile, at Outer Banks, the parents of the Pogs were worried because they were declared missing. Their whereabouts were unknown. At the end of the second season, there was something surprising when Carl Limbry visited a house, and it turned out that Big John, aka John's father, was still alive. Outer Banks Season 3 showed the poor kids, Pogs, were stranded on an empty island which they called Pogalandia. They ate fish and drank coconut water to survive on this island. They worked together with each other, as did Sarah, who was the daughter of a conglomerate. John watched Sarah very carefully when making a roof from coconut leaves, while JJ and Kiara focused on looking for fish with a spear. Meanwhile, Pope and Cleo were looking for berries in the forest. Pope would not give up on getting the Golden Cross because it is his ancestral legacy. That day, Sarah was like seeing a ship, but according to John, it was just a hallucination. Even though they were stranded on a deserted island, these treasure hunters felt that this island is like heaven on earth, because here they were free to do anything. There were no parents who nagged them to get up early to go to school. Here JJ did a reckless action by jumping from the cliff. One morning, Pope saw a plane passing by. He immediately went up the hill, followed by his friends. Pope immediately lit a bonfire so that the plane would see them. Finally, the plane turned around and landed on this island. However, not all the kids welcomed the arrival of this plane belonging to a man named Portis. Having no choice, they all boarded the plane to end the adventure on Pogalandia Island. Portis admitted that the plane was used to look for fish. Meanwhile, Ward and his children were already at their private residence in Guadalupe. Although his father had not yet recovered, Rafe said that the gold bars were still in the safe, including the cross. Meanwhile, Sarah did not believe Portis, who claimed to be a fish finder. She was suspicious that he had been assigned by her father to look for them all. When John diverted Portis' attention, JJ secretly looked for information in his bag. They found a photo of the Coastal Venture ship, which confirmed Sarah's suspicions. And when this plane almost arrived at Barbados, chaos happened. Because the plane was about to sink, they all went out to save themselves, except Kara, who chose to save Portis, who fell unconscious. Not long after, an armed group from Barbados arrived, captured Kiara. Portis told Kiara to follow their orders so that they wouldn't hurt her. On the other hand, an antique trader named Michael came to meet Rafe. He wanted to see the cross made of gold and diamonds. However, Rafe didn't want to say where he found this cross and said that he just wanted to sell it. Apart from institutions and museums, Michael thought there was only one person in Barbados who he thinks will be interested in this treasure. And this is the ruler of Barbados, who was reading a newspaper about John's teacher who found Denmark Tanny's diary. With the wallet and money that JJ had stolen from Portis' bag, they decided to go to Portis' house to find out where Kara had been taken. While Kara was held captive in the house of the ruler of this island, Raph was then attracted to meet the antiques collector, so he decided to go to Barbados to meet him. However, Rose was worried that this was a trap, but Rafe still wanted to prove to his father that he could make money. Accompanied by Limbre, it turned out that Big John was also on this island. He saw the plane which was carrying John and his friends from a deserted island. He reasoned that he didn't contact John, his son, because he didn't want to endanger him. Big John remembered very well about the special bell that would be rung in the afternoon to call his son home. Pogs arrived at Portis' house. Here, they saw a photo of the San Jose ship, the Spanish ship that looked the same in Denmark Tanny's diary. When Portis entered his house, he immediately got attacked. It turned out that Portis didn't work for Ward, but he worked for the ruler of this island, and the police were in his grasp. From inside of Portis' bag, Pope found an envelope containing reward money after handing Kiera. In the envelope, it was found the Vauxhall logo, which had something to do with the person holding Kiera hostage. When they asked the farmer, it turned out that the area was controlled by Vauxhall, and the owner was a boss named Carlos Singh. Initially, Kiera thought that Rafe was her captor, even though Rafe was a guest of Carlos Singh. Carlos' goal was not only about the cross, which is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but there was a much bigger treasure which he called the culmination of the greatest search. Based on the story 450 years ago, a Spanish soldier came out of the Orinoco Basin carrying several gold beads obtained from an indigenous tribe who lives in a city of gold called El Dorado. Since then, many people have been looking for the whereabouts of this tribe, from treasure hunters, ship captains, to many nations competing to get the gold. Thousands of lives have been lost, but they always failed, and now, Carlos needed the two of them to help him. The only thing Carlos wanted is Denmark Tanny's diary. John and his squad entered Carlos Singh's magnificent house. This house was guarded by private soldiers like a drug cartel boss. Kiera admitted that she didn't know about the diary book, and Rafa was also prohibited from leaving Carlos' house. Turns out, John and his friends were detected by a special hunting camera. As a result, they were chased by the security. Kiera watched from the window when Portis was executed. John and his friends hid in an old building to avoid being chased by Carlos' men. Kiera was bored of being locked up in this room. She then asked the bodyguard to tell Carlos that she wanted to meet him. But Kiera didn't want to tell Raph what her plans were, while Big John had difficulty finding out where his son was. But when he heard the ringing of the bell, he had a plan. With Portis' cell phone, which JJ had stolen, they planned to send a message to Carlos, pretending to be Portis, who had captured two of Kiera's friends. But they didn't know Portis had been killed by Carlos. As a result, their actions were laughed at by Carlos. Carlos then immediately sent his men because he could easily track the position of Portis' cell phone. JJ forgot to turn off the location. Before Carlos' troops arrived, John and the others made a trap first. On the other hand, Rafe invited Kiera to take advantage of this situation so they could escape from this house. On the other hand, Limbre helped Big John so he could ring the church bell. Arriving at the location, Carlos' entire private army surrounded this old building. When they entered, JJ and his team trapped them all. Two of Carlos' men were held captive because they used it to exchange with Kiera. However, it turned out that Carlos didn't care, telling them to just kill his men. Because there was no choice, John and his friends immediately ran away by climbing down the rope. John was doubtful, especially after he heard the sound of the ringing bell. Finally, they managed to escape, while Kiera and Rafe pretended to be noisy in the room, even though it was just a trap. They both sneaked out, but before that, Kiera took a picture of a painting from the tribe. Rafe and Kiera got on a log truck, but Rafe paralyzed Carlos' man first. Meanwhile, John and his friends hid in the horse stable and thought about their next plan to free Kiera. John himself was curious about the source of the sound of the bell, which came from the church on the hill over there. And Big John hoped that his son would remember the sound of the bell, even though there were no signs yet. When Rafe asked Kiera to get on his boat, Kiera pushed him instead. Gigi got a message from someone to meet at the dock. Because the sender used the Pogs code, Cleo was sure it came from Kiera. Arriving at the dock, JJ finally found Kiera on the boat. Because John heard the bell ring again, he decided to go to the top of the church with the cell phone that Sarah gave him. But problems arose because Carlos's men surrounded the pier. Because there was no other choice, Sarah decided to leave John. Here, John remembered his childhood when he was raised by his father, because his mother left when he was 3 years old. John loved him very much because he was not protective, and he played a role like a friend in John's life. John regretted a dispute that occurred when he last saw him until his father was declared missing and died. When John entered the church, he finally reunited with his father who was still alive. However, they had no time to let go of their longing, so both of them had to run away because Carlos's men were hunting them. Guilt haunted Sarah and her friends for leaving John. Because his friends were gone, John was invited by his father to go home with his ship. John immediately contacted his friends, inviting them to return home to the Outer Banks. But when John said he had found his father, Sarah couldn't hear his voice. According to John's orders, finally Sarah and her friends sailed to return home. John was taken to his father's hiding place, and there he saw a book entitled El Dorado. It turned out that Big John was exploring the Gold Village. According to what Carlos said, John was getting increasingly confused because his father had a relationship with Carla Limbre. And from that woman, Big John got the ship. Meanwhile, Rafe was stranded with no money in the ship and tricked someone into getting his wallet and identity. After that, he boarded a public boat to sail back home to Guadeloupe. On the other hand, Pope accidentally saw the closeness between JJ and Kiara, which made his heart hurt. And it turns out Big John had to stop by his friend's house first to pick up something. Big John picked up a carved stone which he called a guide to the Orinoco that would take them to El Dorado. Suddenly, Carlos also came there to look for John and his father, but both of them managed to escape from there through the window. On his boat, Big John told what happened to him when he was stranded for months on the island after Ward tried to kill him. Carlos managed to track the ship and then sent his men. But Big John attacked one of Carlos's men and then left him there. So actually, it wasn't his body but the bodies of Carlos's men. After that, Big John was held captive in Carlos's house. Carlos forced him to reveal everything he knew about El Dorado as a guarantee that he would be left alive. And one day, Big John decided to run away with this stone. Meanwhile, because they needed supplies, Cleo and Pope stole some food from a shop. Cleo was caught, but in the end, they managed to escape. On the other hand, John admitted that he was engaged to Sarah, Ward's daughter. Even though they knew how evil Ward was, Big John still approved John's relationship with Sarah. That night, Cleve cheered for Pope, who was gloomy because he was disappointed with JJ and Kiara, while Big John showed a map of the location of the City of Gold, which many people think is above the Orinoco Basin. In fact, the gold in the cross came from El Dorado, and this piece of stone was a clue to get there. This stone was what they had to translate. Because this stone was cut, the answer is in Denmark Tanny's diary. That's why Carlos was so insistent on getting it. They went home because John had a copy of it in the car, while the original book was in his history teacher. Raph was assigned by his father, who had recovered, to return to the Outer Banks to sell their remaining assets there, such as rental property, including Tanny Hill. Long story short, John and his father arrived at their house, with bells which John remembered well, until the two of them were able to reunite. At night, John was surprised by Carlos' arrival, who suddenly attacked his father. And suddenly, he was surprised by Sarah, who had gone home. John told Sarah that his father was still alive, but it turned out that his father was not there. It turns out that Big John was looking for a copy of Denmark Tanny's diary in John's car. But the book had been destroyed by the water. Sarah only believed that after seeing John's father, Sarah would go home first to get clothes. Meanwhile, Kiara was taken home by her friends. Initially, Kiara thought she would be scolded again, but it turned out that Kiara's parents were relieved to see their daughter again. Gigi got the bad luck because his house has been cordoned off by a police line, so now he lives alone. Meanwhile, Pope asked for his parents' approval so that Cleo could stay with them because she was already saving his life. Before John left with his father, John left a message for his friends, saying that he went with his father. They then headed to John's history teacher's house, which was named Sun, to find the original book. They entered the house because they didn't see anyone there. But suddenly, John was attacked. It turned out that the captain of the ship and his crew had already found the diary. Sun had been held captive by them, so John was invited by his father to immediately chase them, who fled using a boat. They continued the journey using jet ski, belonging to John's friend. Big John asked them to listen to his offer first, so they could get more profit than handing over the book to Carlos. Secretly, they planned to kill John and hand over his father to Carlos. When they were getting closer, this is what John's father did. John didn't expect his father to kill these two men right in front of his eyes. On the other hand, JJ was happy when he found out that John had found his father who was still alive, but the problem now lies with JJ himself, who didn't dare to express his feelings to Kira. He felt that he's just a poor kid who has no hope for the future. Meanwhile, Kira came from a rich family. Meanwhile, guilt-haunted Ward, who almost killed his own daughter. Because the gold cross was difficult to sell, Ward thought about donating it to a museum, even though he was sure that this plan was not approved by Ref. When Sarah was taking out her belongings, she overheard her brother's voice talking on the telephone with Ward. Ref didn't agree with his father's plan to donate the cross to the museum. Ref almost discovered Sarah's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Pope told his parents about the cross from their ancestors, which now was in Rafe's hand, but he promised to take it back because the treasure belonged to his family. In another place, John could only remain silent after seeing his father sink the bodies of the thugs and the ship. Sarah told Kira that Rafe had been assigned by her father to take the cross to Wilmington tomorrow night. Even though her parents had forbidden her, Kira was willing to back in action with her friends. On the other hand, Rafe met Barry to ask for his help, even though the last time they met, Barry had tricked him into being arrested by the police. Here, Rafe told Barry to steal the cross from him, and this was because he didn't agree with his family's plan to put the cross in a museum. Barry agreed as long as he got a fine share. In Pog's base, JJ resolved the problem with Kira so that there was no more awkwardness between them. While Big John read Denmark Tanny's diary and found out that there was a priest who survived from San Jose. The priest was put into the cargo hold, but he died of malaria. He was buried with his belongings while docked at Charleston, and Big John would come to this church, where the priest was buried. Suddenly, John stopped the car. He still couldn't believe his father took away other people's lives. Big John then persuaded his son, saying that he was forced to do that because he didn't want to lose him. Let it become his burden because they had to continue this treasure hunt. The news broadcast stated that 4 teenagers who previously declared missing have now returned home. Big John, who was previously declared dead, was in fact still alive and had returned home. Not only Rafe, Topper also saw the news that Sarah was returning to this island. At the Pug's base, Sarah revealed what she heard about Rafe's plan to take the Golden Cross to Wilmington tonight using a relic train. Because John went with his father using Twinkie, Pope would try to borrow his father's truck. But his father firmly refused because his truck was used to work. Even so, Pope was still lucky to be allowed to go, but he must still be careful. Arriving at Charleston, Big John and his son were looking for an old church which has now been turned into a Thai restaurant, and everything had been moved to the Charleston Museum. Kiara's parents didn't believe it when their daughter said that Ward was still alive. Even though JJ helped to convince them to help Pope get back his ancestral heirlooms, Kiara's parents didn't believe it. They even insulted JJ, who had a negative influence on Kiara. Because they couldn't stop Kiara anymore, Kiara's mother gave her a cell phone and a credit card for her next adventure. When Big John entered the museum, he claimed to be a doctor. He was looking for information about items taken from Trinity Church in the 1880s. However, they couldn't access the archives because it was in the museum warehouse on Brown Street. Only directors like Miss Flannery could get in there. JJ and his friends gathered on the boat, and they had difficulty getting a vehicle to carry the cross, which they were going to seize from Ref. There they saw Topper. So, like it or not, Sarah was the one who could persuade Topper, because he has the vehicles and equipment they need. Sarah initially didn't agree because she didn't want to hurt John again, but her friends guaranteed that John would understand because it has something to do with the treasure. Meanwhile, John was asked by his father to threaten the director at gunpoint so that she would give him her access card. Initially, John refused, but his father insisted. In the end, John threatened the woman gently even though he was carrying a gun. Because of that, the museum director was not afraid. In another place, Sarah managed to persuade Topper to borrow his truck, which would be used to transport the cross. When John and his father arrived at the museum warehouse, they successfully entered the building after blocking the door. While Sarah and her friends were already on top of the train carriage to find the position of the cross based on the cargo number she got from his brother. Inside the archaeologist's storage room, Big John found items taken from Trinity Church. Cleo and Pope found the carriage they were looking for, but suddenly the train started to move. Because of that, the other kids made plans to stop it. Finally, Big John found the stone pieces, and sure enough, the stone matches the one he was carrying. By using jumper cables stretched over the rails, JJ and Kiara managed to cause the light to change into red, so they could stop the train. But unexpectedly, John loses his car, making them confused. Why would anyone want to steal that crappy car? But they found a message from Carl Limbre, who said that she had taken Twinkie. When Pope opened the carriage, he was caught by an officer. Pope and Cleo then reasoned that they were a couple whose parents do not approve, so they ran away from their hometown. Finally, they were allowed to board the train. After they successfully broke through the door, Sarah and Topper came to help them steal the package containing the cross. But not long after, the police came to chase them. After making sure Kira was safe in the car, JJ turned around and made a brave action, facing the police car. Meanwhile, Sarah asked Topper to turn around to help JJ. Right on the bridge, this is what happened. Even though his motorbike was destroyed, JJ was fine. On the other hand, John and his father came to Limbre's house and saw their car there. Big John told about the priest and the cloth, which Limbre believed could cure her illness. Big John admitted that he had found the cloth in the museum, so he gave it to Limbre. Here, Limbre wiped the cloth, and then she stood up without her cane. Miraculously, she was able to walk without it, even though John was very hesitant at first. Finally, John and his father left with Twinkie. On the other hand, JJ and his friends asked Topper to speed up his car, but suddenly the crossbox fell. And unexpectedly, it was just an old tire. They had been pranked by Raph, because in fact, Rafe had taken the cross. Rafe and Barry were planning to melt it. Big John asked John to keep their discovery about the El Dorado a secret from his friends. He reasoned that he didn't want to endanger them, and again, John could only comply. Pope and JG were so happy to be reunited with Big John, just like friends who haven't seen each other for a long time. John said that he and his father failed to get a clue at the Charleston Museum. But as friends who had adventures together, they could read that John was hiding something. Even though Sarah had persuaded him, John still didn't want to tell the truth. And here, Sarah started to feel unappreciated by John. On the other hand, Rafe pretended not to know when his father said that the cross had been stolen on the train. He admitted he didn't really care about it, because the cross would be put in the museum. Besides, Rafe also refused to sell their assets in Tanny Hill, including closing their company. And this made Ward angry with Rafe. While Rafe felt that this time, he was the one who should become a leader, because his father was declared dead. John and his father's adventure continued, and now they met with John's father's friend, an archaeologist named Dr. Kelly. When they arrived there, it turned out that Kelly had died due to a heart attack. Kelly's friend, Eric, said that Kelly's death was very strange because Kelly had just returned from an expedition from her latest discovery in South America. The expedition leader was called Professor Sowell, who turned out to be Big John's mentor. On the one hand, Sarah intended to ask Kara for help so she could stay at her house, but Kara's parents were not allowed to. After that, Sarah came to JJ's house, but he wasn't there. Sarah found herself homeless, making her give up and decided to steal beer from Topper's cafe. Topper used this opportunity to seduce her again. The moment was right because Sarah felt disrespected by John, so Sarah went back to hanging out with the rich kids. At the same time, JJ was rejected from working at the restaurant where he used to work. GG then accidentally saw Rafe and Barry on the boat. He heard that Rafe had melted the cross and then made it into small pieces and then sold it. JG immediately told this to Pope, making him angry because his ancestral heirloom had been destroyed. Pope would not stay silent. He would teach a lesson to Raph. While Big John and his son arrived at the professor's house, John was shocked because someone attacked him. And it turned out he was Professor Sowell. The professor admitted that he was hiding because there is someone who was targeting him. In the lighthouse tower, Topper started seducing Sarah, wanting her to like him again. Sarah's beautiful face is indeed capable of conquering any rich man she wants. On the other hand, Pope's father said that he lost his gun, and JJ and Cleo realized that Pope took it to get revenge on Rafe. Meanwhile, the professor revealed his expedition in the Venezuelan mountains, specifically in the Orinoco River Valley. Of the 5 people who took part in the expedition, 3 of them had died, so only the professor and one other person survived. John showed the stone from Solana, a stick that formed a shadow. If this object was placed in the right place and time, it would give clues or directions to El Dorado. After that, the professor showed a picture of the Solana site, but suddenly, some people arrived. John and his father were also caught, and the mastermind was Carlos. Initially, Carlos would kill Big John, but he was going to take him because only he could translate what was implied on the stone. Meanwhile, John was going to be executed with a hypodermic needle, but he could escape. In another place, Pope almost fired a shot at Rafe, but Cleo came to stop him before he did something stupid. At the Pog's base, John apologized to JJ for his wrong attitude after he saw his father kill 2 men, just to protect him. And now, John needed his help to save his father again. On the other hand, Ward was determined to return home to this island, even though he was threatened with being arrested by the police because of various crimes he had committed. Meanwhile, Sarah felt confused about who she will choose between John, the poor boy, or Topper, the rich boy. When she met Kara, Sarah was embarrassed because Kara saw her with Topper, so she canceled her breakfast and then left with Kara. At the same time, John and JJ went back to the professor's house to look for clues. Finally, John found a paper about the Solana site, and the last words the professor said to him was Neville, the expedition guide. Because he was someone who knew about the expedition, John and JJ immediately went to look for him. Meanwhile, Rafe was shocked to see his father home. Ward couldn't believe that Rafe had melted the cross and then sold it in stages. He also refused to return to Guadalupe, so Ward couldn't stop him. Here, Sarah got a message from her sister who admitted to have run away from home, and because of that she asked Sarah to meet her at the condo. John and JJ find Neville's ship and house. When they enter the house, they get attacked. After explaining the matter, Neville didn't believe that Professor Saul had been killed. John needed his help to tell him the location of the El Dorado in order to save his father. And suddenly, another attack came. Luckily, they managed to escape from Carlos' assassination attempt. Meanwhile, Rafe and Barry sold the gold nuggets from the cross, which they melted down to get rich. They used the money for parties with girls. While they were drunk, Barry influenced Rafe to kill his father so that he could do anything he wanted. When studying, Pope couldn't get out of his mind to find the origins of where his ancestors, Denmark Tanny, got the gold. His history teacher advised him to look back at his family archives. That day, Sarah was intending to meet her sister, but turns out she met her father. Sarah expressed her anger because she almost died because of him. And now Sarah felt like a homeless person who had no money or a place to live. It turned out her father wanted to apologize for all his bad actions, and because of that, he gave Sarah a credit card to support her life. Meanwhile, Neville told the history of El Dorado, which was first discovered by King Guajiro. Even though the gold was very abundant, not just anyone can get it, unless they successfully pass the Nomen test. If they fail, they will definitely die. However, John didn't care about the gold. All he cares about is his father. He just wants his father's safety. Finally, Neville told John the plot and direction to get to El Dorado. On the other hand, Carlos was taking Big John to El Dorado while forcing him to translate the script on the stone. Meanwhile, Sarah came to the wedding anniversary event held by Kira's parents. At the same time, Topper was also there. John and JJ also came, intending to pick up these 2 girls to take part in the next adventure to save Big John. When he met Sarah, John apologized because his attitude was wrong. However, Sarah confessed that last night he made love with Topper. John burned in jealousy, and here, John chose to break up with Sarah. There was also a dispute between JJ and Kira. Here, Kira loves JJ very much, but JJ feels that he is not worthy. Seeing Topper hugging Sarah, John immediately expressed his emotions. Meanwhile, Pope found a letter written by Denmark Tanny to his daughter, and it was still sealed with the symbol of wheat. In the letter, Denmark told about his meeting with the priest who talked about the statue and the city of gold. This is the beginning when Denmark gets the gold. The next morning, John hit the bell that his father used to do, hoping it will be his turn to come home. Now, John had to find a way to fly to South America to save his father before Carlos killed him. Suddenly, the sheriff came there to arrest John because last night, he attacked Topper. Because John didn't want to come out, the sheriff put a tracking device on John's car. Meanwhile, Rafe was provoked because Ward was going to take over his company again. He was also going to sell Tanny Hill, and they could leave this island. Ward was not afraid, even though Rafe would report it to the sheriff. However, Rafe even dared to hold his father at gunpoint. Sarah came to Topper's house, hoping he would not report John to the police. However, it turned out that Topper and his mother agreed to sue John and at the same time asked Sarah to be a witness. Here, Sarah realized that Topper was not as good as she thought. In another place, JJ took John to meet his father's old acquaintance, Mike. He was a drug smuggler who imported goods from South America. The 2 of them would help Mike become a porter as long as they were allowed to fly to Venezuela. JJ's plan was successful, and Mike asked them to return later in the afternoon. To help John find his father in Venezuela, Sarah returned to see her father because he promised her to do anything to make amends for his mistake. Long story short, JJ and John returned to meet Mike to help him unload the narcotics. However, it turned out that they were assigned to deliver the packages to Elizabeth City. On the way, they were both worried after seeing the police ticketing a car. As a result, this is what happened. Meanwhile, Carlos had taken Big John to the inland of Venezuela to find the El Dorado. Big John admitted that he was willing to lead his academics to become a doctor to prove to his son that he was not a loser. Meanwhile, Rafe told Barry to finish off his father because he no longer wanted to be controlled by him. In another place, John and JG blamed each other after leaving the truck loaded with drugs. Unexpectedly, the sheriff was already in front of them to arrest John in the case of beating Topper, even though John had already urged to immediately go to South America to save his father. At the same time, Pope and Cleo came to see Kiara to see a photo of the painting she got from Carlos' house. In fact, the hieroglyphic drawing that Denmark Tanning made for his daughter is exactly the same as the artifact found in El Dorado. They can use this important information to save John's father. Sarah came to the police station and Topper was waiting to make a report because John had been detained by the police. Sarah persuaded Topper to postpone his report for one more day because John would go to South America to save his father and would not return to this island. And Sarah promised to stay on this island with Topper. Finally, Topper postponed his demands and John was released again. John was touched after finding out that Sarah had freed him. Now Sarah invited John to join the other friends because she had a way to take them to South America. Sarah admitted that her father allowed her to use the plane to fly to Venezuela the next day. Before that, Sarah asked her friends to come together again like when they were on Pagalandia. Because Sarah didn't answer his calls, Topper began to realize that Sarah had played with him. Plus, Rafe said that Sarah was with John. Because of that, Topper came to John's house and here he clearly saw that Sarah was with John. Topper, who couldn't stand it any longer, decided to burn down John's house. Even though they were all still inside. Even though John and his friends were safe, the house burned down, leaving nothing. Because the plane would arrive in 1 hour, Pope would say goodbye to his parents first, as well as Kiara, while JJ would pack first. On the other hand, Rafe again asked his father to leave this island, but Ward refused. Pope was finally allowed to leave by his father after Cleo promised to look after him. While JJ was packing clothes, Mike appeared to ask for compensation because he lost his drug load. Luckily, JJ managed to escape, but misfortune befell Kiara, who suddenly was forcibly picked up by the boarding school at the request of her parents. Kiara couldn't fight at all, even though her friends were waiting. Because Kiara didn't come, JJ immediately went to pick her up by Twinkie. Arriving at Kiara's house, JJ found out that Kiara had been taken away by the boarding school staff, but her parents didn't want to tell more. In a tightly guarded dormitory, Kiara tried to escape while pretending to go to the toilet. Unfortunately, her plan failed. Meanwhile, Rafe only realized he had made a mistake after this girl was sure that he was a good person. It turned out that Barry assigned an assassin to finish off Ward. On the other hand, JJ immediately went to Kiara's dormitory after receiving information from Ricky. When JJ contacted John, asking him to wait, suddenly problems arose because Mike managed to find him. Before Mike's men shot him, JJ offered to work together to get gold treasure, which is in South America. That's why JJ needed Mike's help to get him to fly there. In another place, Rafe just found out that Barry sent a hitman to finish off his father. That time, Rafe immediately went to save Ward. Topper came to the runway, expressing his disappointment to Sarah, who had played with him. John was suspicious of how Topper knew that his house was on fire. After that, Topper immediately told the sheriff to catch John on the runway, while JJ had arrived in the dormitory, pretending to be Kiara's cousin, who wanted to inform the sad news. Meanwhile, the hitman tried to kill Ward, but luckily, Rafe came on time to save his father. Rafe immediately took his father away because there was someone who knew Ward. On the other hand, before Kiara was transferred to room number 6, Kiara left a message for JJ to read. After receiving the report, Sheriff and his men immediately hunted for John and Ward, who turned out to be still alive. And now the sheriff headed for the runway. John and his friends did not expect to see Ward in an injured condition. Rafe then took his father into the plane. Like it or not, John and his friends continued to go on this plane, even though Ward was in it. Even though Rafe had previously sent the hitman, Ward felt proud because his son came back to save him. Shortly, the plane immediately took off before the police came to arrest them. Meanwhile, JJ sneaked into the dormitory to pick up Kiara, and then the two of them expressed their feelings. When leaving the dorm, JJ and Kiera were picked up by Mike to catch up with their friends who had already left for El Dorado. On the plane, Ward convinced John that he only wanted to help him and all of them. He was also happy because John's father was still alive. On the other side, Carlos was getting closer to El Dorado with the clues given by Big John. Carlos gave him 2 more days until the full moon to find El Dorado, or he would be finished. The next morning, John relied on the map Neville gave him to get to El Dorado. According to his instructions, they have to find someone named Joseph and then go along the river. Meanwhile, JJ and Kara were on another plane, which would land a few hours later from Tres Roques. After landing in Venezuela, Ward insisted on joining the team, but Sarah forbade him and told him to go back home to Guadalupe. Meanwhile, JJ and Kara continued their journey using the bus. While John and his friends had arrived first at Tres Roques, they then split up to look for a guide named Jose. On the other hand, Big John intended to escape through the window, but was caught up by Carlos' men. Suddenly, John heard his father's voice screaming up there. John used firecrackers to attack Carlos' headquarters. Finally, John could see his father again, but they immediately ran away from Carlos' men. Pope and Cleo also ran away. Coincidentally, JJ and Kiera had just arrived there and saw them running. Here, John showed a letter from Denmark Tanny, which was the next clue that Big John needed. After that, they started to look for the guide again. When John managed to find Jose, it turned out he was paid by Ward to guide John and the team. Seeing Ward there, Big John really wanted to express his anger. However, because the threat from Carlos was getting closer, they immediately left. Long story short, they arrived at El Sotoro. Ward came along because he only wanted to protect Sarah, and he didn't care about the gold. Mike facilitated JJ and the team a boat to follow John to El Sotoro. The adventure of the treasure hunters would begin in this forest because they would be tested by the jaguar god. It is said that in 500 years, there is no one worthy. Only those who are wise and lucky will get it. At night, Ward was seen holding a cell phone as if he wanted to send this location point to someone. Because he was injured, Ward chose to stay here waiting for them, and he would shoot a flare if Carlos came chasing them. Big John, Sarah, and John started climbing the mountain. Meanwhile, JJ and his friends saw Carlos' men movements who were hunting them. Until this moment, Big John admitted that he didn't believe in Ward and his daughter, and he accused them of spying on him to take control of the treasure he had been fighting for more than 20 years. Shortly, they arrived at the top of the mountain and saw the statue clearly. And right at night, John put the stone while waiting for the moon to be right at its peak. It turned out that each of the hieroglyphic symbols lit up one by one, and that's when Big John translated it to get the location of El Dorado. After successfully solving the puzzle, Big John didn't want to reveal it because he still didn't believe Sarah. Suddenly, Carlos appeared and surrounded them. Apparently, it was all because of Ward, who admitted that he was forced to make a deal to protect Sarah, even though Ward's ridiculous actions actually endangered her. Big John was forced to tell Carlos where El Dorado was, or he would kill his son. Meanwhile, Sarah refused to go with her father and chose to go with John. In the morning, JJ and the team had just arrived at El Sotoro. There, they saw Carlos's men, who were still asleep. They used firecrackers to drive away the criminals. On the other hand, their journey was hampered because Big John had a gunshot wound. Suddenly, Sarah heard a voice coming from inside the cave. According to the instructions, it says there is no tongue, but it can talk. Trying to go in there, John found a way through the gap. Because Big John chose to stay, he told his son the last part, which says that the true and patient seekers don't need light to see. Meanwhile, Carlos was getting closer to Big John. Meanwhile, Sarah and John continued their journey down the cave. Because their flashlight was off, they used a flare which could burn for 20 minutes. But the flare that they brought was only 3, and they had to use it effectively. Here, John felt hopeless because there was nothing in this cave, and that's when Sarah remembered again with the final clue, which said that the true and patient hunter doesn't need light to see. When they turned off the flare, Sarah did this. After the cave door opened, they lit up the flare again. It turned out they had to jump over a cliff. John managed to do it, but the flare fell. And now it's Sarah's turn. Finally, Sarah and John managed to find the gold city, El Dorado. This cave was really filled with gold. They took some gold, and after that they came out of the cave. When John and Sarah came out of there, Carlos was waiting for them. Carlos told John to take out the contents of his bag. After seeing the gold, Carlos forced Big John to come out or else his son would be killed. Big John came out, but he was holding a TNT. Big John refused to turn it off, and he asked John and Sarah to run. Big John asked to rest for a while because his wounds were getting worse. But he was happy that John and Sarah managed to get the gold. Suddenly, Ward appeared, pointing a gun. Meanwhile, JJ and the others were already there, ready to attack the greedy Ward. Finally, Ward put his gun down, but Carlos' man appeared, pointing the gun. Because he was going to shoot Sarah, Ward stopped him. Finally, they went back down the mountain carrying Big John, who was increasingly critical. And finally, Big John died. Shortly, John and his friends went home with the gold. 18 months later, John and his friends held an event to celebrate their success in finding the El Dorado, which was a mystery that had not been solved for 500 years. Before, they were poor kids who were always humiliated, but now their lives have changed to become rich kids. There, an old man looked at various archaeological objects they found. This old man offered a cooperation for the next treasure hunt from a ship in 1718 with the captain Edward Teach Aka Blackbird, which is very famous.